Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 terrifying true cemetery horror stories, we walk beyond the rusted gates of graveyards where names fade on headstones. Flowers decay overnight and the silence feels alive. These are chilling true accounts of bells that toll without wind, footsteps circling fresh graves, and whispers seeping from broken tombs long after midnight. This channel is growing fast, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Nearly 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. If you enjoy true horror told from the shadows, hit subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And if your town has a cemetery that makes your skin crawl, type its name below. Because some gates, once crossed, don't let everyone leave. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath, and let's begin. I'm posting this because I need someone to tell me I didn't imagine it. If you're from Laredo and you've ever heard the bell by the city cemetery in the middle of the night, I need you to comment. Even if you think it was a train or the wind or some metal shifting with the temperature, just say something. I can't sleep and I can't get the sound out of my head. I keep checking the time on my phone like that'll change what happened. This starts last summer, late June, when the heat felt like it was sitting on my shoulders. I had moved back to Laredo to help my mom after my dad's stroke. Dad wasn't a cemetery guy or a church guy, but he liked quiet places and walking in the evenings. When he was still able, he used to walk past the fence of the city cemetery and read names he didn't know. He called it checking in on the neighbors. After he was gone, the place was stuck in my head. I was doing odd jobs and looking for something steady, and a friend of mine, Danny, who works for the city, told me the grounds crew was hiring seasonal help. Mowing, hauling branches, cleaning up after windstorms. Nothing complicated. My supervisor was a man named Raul who had been there longer than the office furniture. He was thin and leathery and always wore the same sun-faded hat. On my first day, he told me about the bell. He didn't start with ghost stories. He started with history. The tower is a squat brick thing near the north wall, not tall like a church steeple, more like a square chimney with a roof. The bell was used for funeral processions way back, and for a while after that, they'd ring it when the gates closed at dusk. Then, according to Raul, it developed a habit of ringing at 3:12 a.m. No one pulling the rope, nothing tied to the clapper. People complained. The city tied the wheel, then barred it. It still rang, not every night, but often enough that Raul had that look you get when a problem won't stay fixed. I thought he was messing with the new guy. He showed me the bar, though. It ran right through the wheel, pinned on both sides with big iron caps you'd need a wrench for. The rope had been removed long ago. The mouth of the bell was dusty. A pigeon had tried to nest there and given up. Nothing about it looked capable of ringing. Raul shrugged like he'd already lost too many arguments with it. The first few weeks were normal. Raking, trimming, pulling weeds that came up like wire out of the gravel. You learn the layout fast. You learn where the ground dips and the sprinklers spit and which rows get muddy after rain. I started to notice something Raul called settling. Some graves are old and the soil collapses a little over time. Families call and the crew adds dirt, tamps it, smooths it. That's how it goes. But there were a handful of graves near the bell tower that sank faster than they should have. Like a slow breath out, Raul kept a notebook and measurements. He never made a big show of it, but he measured almost every morning and wrote numbers without comment. I didn't hear the bell myself for a while. What I heard weeks in was Danny making fun of me for taking a cemetery job and then stopping suddenly when I mentioned the time 3:12. She said she once sat up in bed at that exact time with a ringing in her teeth. She didn't hear it with her ears. She felt it. She didn't like talking about it. She changed the subject by asking how Mom was doing and offered to take me to lunch at a taco truck by the river. After that, 3:12 started living in my head. It's like when someone tells you to ignore the red car and that's all you see. On a Tuesday in July, Raul asked if I wanted to earn some overtime and lock the cemetery that evening, close the gates at dusk, walk the main roads with a flashlight, check the fence for breaks. I said yes. I texted Danny that I was playing night watchman and she sent a badge emoji and a skull. Raul handed me a keyring and a small battered radio that only ever got 2 channels, weather and dispatch. He said if I heard kids or saw lights, call it in. If I heard the bell, stand still and listen. That's how he said it. Not call 911, listen. The light goes fast out there when the sun drops. The last visitors left and I closed the big gate with the long chain. I liked the sound of the links, the weight, and the scrape. The heat hung in the grass and everything smelled like dust and cut stems. The tower took shape as I walked the loop, just a darker square against the sky. There were still grackles complaining from the pecans by the south fence. A kid on a bike rattled past outside and yelled something I couldn't catch. The river noise was a low hush. Nothing happened for an hour. I did another lap. I checked a gap in the chain link where it meets the brick near the east corner. Someone had tried to pry it up and got bored. I sat on the curb across from the bell tower and drank hot water from a bottle that had been in my truck all day. Mosquitoes found my ankles and I slapped at them without looking. Somewhere a dog barked and then barked again and then stopped like it remembered something. The radio hissed and said weather words about humidity and heat index. I watched the tower and felt a little stupid. It was 3:10 on my phone when I instinctively checked it. Seeing the numbers made me feel like I'd cheated at a game I didn't understand. I put the phone face down on my thigh and decided I wouldn't look again. The cemetery had its own time anyway. I looked at the line of graves closest to the tower. Raoul's tape flags flickered a little in the faint breeze. He had stuck them in at the corners to mark a grid where he measured. One flag sagged like the ground had swallowed a little of the plastic stick. I remember thinking I should push it down deeper in the morning. The bell rang. If you're expecting a loud clang like the start of a boxing round, that's not what it was. It sounded tired and definite. It was a single thick note like hitting the side of a heavy glass with a spoon. It came from above and at the same time from inside my chest. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Every grackle shut up. Every rustle stopped. I stood without meaning to. The flashlight felt useless in my hand, so I turned it off. The second ring came like a breath later, softer, as if it were further away, but I was 10 feet from the tower. Then the third, quieter still. The note seemed to fall into the ground and not come back. When it finished, I realized I hadn't breathed. Somewhere in the rows, a sprinkler clicked and turned, and that normal little sound came back like a lifeline. I laughed louder than I meant to. It wasn't funny. It was relief trying to disguise itself. I wanted to call Raoul and say I heard it, but he had told me to listen. So I listened to nothing for a while and then to the slow return of small noises. When I turned the flashlight back on, I noticed the grid. I swear this is true. The dirt around the closest grave, a simple stone with a carved cross and a name I won't share here, looked slightly lower than it had been an hour earlier. There were no footprints. The ground hadn't caved in like after rain. It was subtle, the way a person's chest kind of settles in a deep sleep. I clicked off the light and stood there in the shadow of a bell that shouldn't be ringing. I must have stood too long because my phone buzzed in my pocket with a text from Danny. "You done ghost busting?" I typed back I heard it. She called, not texting, and her voice was small on the line. She said, "What time?" I said, "You know what time?" She was quiet and then said, "Go home. Lock up and go home." Her car radio had done something once at that time and she didn't want to tell me what. I said I wanted to check the measurements in the morning before anyone touched them. She sighed and said fine and told me to share location until sunrise. I thought about telling her not to be dramatic and then didn't. The next morning I was at the cemetery early. The grass was still wet and my shoes squeaked in it. Raoul was there already with his notebook and tape. He didn't need me to say anything. He pointed and I followed his finger to the grave I'd been looking at. The dirt had settled by nearly an inch. Raoul measured and wrote and didn't comment. He went to the next one and the next. Some had changed a quarter inch. One hadn't changed at all. He put a check mark next to the inch one and then flipped his notebook back through pages. His hand was a little unsteady. He asked me what time I heard it. I told him. He nodded and pressed his thumb to a spot on the paper where the pages had gotten soft with use. He said that grave had been stable for weeks and then last night had picked up almost exactly what it had lost the week before. His math brain was better than mine. I asked what it meant. He said it meant I needed to get used to questions he couldn't answer. I kept working. It's amazing how fast the mind can fold something strange into the pile of things it carries. I mowed, I hauled. I waved to a woman named Mrs. Alvarez who came every Wednesday to place flowers by her husband's stone and tell him the weather. She wore a big hat and smelled like lilies. She always said goodbye to the rest of the cemetery as if it were a room full of people. Once she touched my arm and said a bell is a promise. I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I put it in my pocket and carried it around. There were nights after that where the bell didn't ring. There were nights where I wasn't there and still woke up around 3:12 with a feeling like a phantom orthodontist had tightened my retainer. Raoul showed me his Notebook like a man showing a family photo album he didn't want to own. The dates and numbers made a rhythm. Some mornings the grid around the tower had sunk a lot. On those days the cemetery felt heavier. On days the numbers barely moved, it felt almost normal. I started to notice the dogs. If the bell rang only once, the neighborhood dogs were quiet. If it rang twice, there was a scattered chorus. 3 times and the barking went wild up and down the block. A chain reaction of nervous throats. I don't know why I did what I did next. That's not me trying to dodge responsibility. It's just the truth. Curiosity is a slow fever. It doesn't make you hallucinate. It only shoves you an inch at a time toward a door, and then, when you try to stop, you're already leaning and the door is already open. I asked Raul if we could set a camera on the bell. Not a motion sensor like the old wildlife cams that miss things, but something that recorded all night. He shrugged and said we could if I brought my own. I borrowed a small action camera from Danny's ex who had moved on to drones and didn't care if I lost it. We rigged it under the roof like a little bug. It had a clear view of the wheel and the mouth of the bell. I felt stupid taping a camera to a bell that a bar had turned into a statue. Raul smiled at me with no joy and said, "Bring batteries." We got 2 nights of nothing. The 3rd night I locked the gate, checked the camera, sat on the curb and felt every minute like a weight. When the time came, the bell rang. 1, then 2, then 3. It didn't sound like a person hitting metal. It sounded like the note was being pulled out of the metal from far away. The hairs stood up on my neck and arms and my hands felt too small. I stood there and did not run. I waited until morning. We watched the footage in the tiny office where the window unit air conditioner sounds like it's trying to chew ice. On screen, the tower sat in gray infrared. Nothing moved. At 3:12, the bell rang. The camera recorded the sound, which was weirder than I expected. You could see the vibration shiver in the pixels, the way a cheap camera does when it hears a bass note. The wheel didn't turn. The clapper didn't swing. The dust didn't fall. It rang again. It rang a 3rd time. Nothing moved. If you pause the video at the moment of the first note and step through frame by frame, there is nothing to see except a tiny jitter in the whole image, like your heart when you wake from a too short nap. Raul said sometimes proof is just a new shape of the same question. He wrote numbers in his book and checked the grid. The inch grave had settled more. The one that hadn't moved in days finally sank a 1/4 inch. He rubbed his temple and told me to take lunch. I drove to my mom's, but I didn't go inside. I sat in the truck with the AC roaring and watched the camera clip again and again. On the 5th watch, I noticed a small thing in the lower corner. I thought it was a bug at first, a flicker that pops in and out like filter noise. It showed up right before the 2nd ring, down where the brick meets the concrete slab. It wasn't a shape so much as a distortion, a spot where the image didn't track right. I wrote a note in my phone to mark the time code. When I slowed it down frame by frame, I realized why it bothered me. The distortion was the same size and irregular shape as the patch of dirt where Raul's checkmark grave sat in the grid outside. It didn't make sense. The camera wasn't pointed at the ground, but if you traced where that grave was in space from the camera's angle, it lined up with the glitch. My head started to hurt and I shut off the clip. I told Danny. She stared at the video and then at me and then at the tiny calendar on the cemetery office wall like that would help. She has this thing where she laughs when she's anxious. She laughed and told me to get some sleep and then said she didn't mean it that way. She walked with me out to the grid and stood at the edge of it with her hands on her hips like a cop measuring skid marks. She said she didn't like the way the dirt was darker in a ring around the worst of the sinkers, like a halo that something heavy had pressed. It hadn't rained in days. There shouldn't have been wet circles. That night, Raul locked the gate himself and told me to go home. He said his knees were hurting and the bell had had its fun. I went home and lay on top of my bed in the heat, waiting not to fall asleep. At 3:12, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. Not a call, not a text. The string buzz the phone makes when you set the timer to 0. I hadn't set a timer. I sat up and stared at the screen, which was open to the camera app for no reason I could remember. I looked at location sharing and saw Raul's dot still at the cemetery. I texted him, "Are you good?" He didn't respond. 10 minutes later, I grabbed my keys. The air felt like a wet towel. The drive was short. I parked outside the gate and went over the fence like an idiot teenager. The tower looked bigger in the dark. My chest felt hollow, like after you run and stop and your lungs forget the script. I didn't call out to Raul. I moved toward the tower and saw his hat on the curb by the grid. It looked like something someone had taken off and placed down by habit. The tape flags had fallen all at once in a way that made no sense. The plastic sticks lay flat like they had decided simultaneously to lie down and rest. There were no footprints. The ground had a new curve to it, a softness like bread proofing. When I stepped near it, my shoe sank half an inch and then the dirt gave a tiny sigh and settled more. It is possible to feel a cemetery breathe. I did. Raoul stood at the base of the tower with his hand on the brick. He didn't turn when I said his name. He said hold on like he was on the phone. He was listening to something I couldn't hear. He put his palm flat and leaned close. He said it sounds different when you're this close. He said you can hear the way it travels through the wall first and then the metal. I told him we should go. He didn't move, the bell rang. It was a small sound. Close up, it vibrated in my teeth hard enough to make me bite my tongue. The tower did a tiny shiver that I didn't see so much as feel through my shoes. I reached for Raoul's shoulder and he shrugged me off with surprising strength. He said, listen. He pressed his ear to the brick like a child to a door. He said it's not the bell that starts it. The brick tells it first. He said a word I didn't catch. It could have been name. It could have been number. The second ring came and I found myself looking down at the grid, at the particular grave that had taken on inches and inches this month. And I swear I watched the surface of it dip like a bowl of water tapped with a finger. Raoul stepped toward it. I grabbed him and he twisted. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He just wanted to be where the sound was traveling. He took one more step and his heel sank and then his toe. The ground did not cave in. It received him. He didn't panic. He looked embarrassed like a man who has mistakenly walked into a pool at a party. I pulled and he laughed and said stop, and then the third ring came and I don't know how to describe what the dirt did except to say it relaxed. It took him to his calves in a slow slide. He said I'm okay and then he wasn't. I dug my fingers into his forearms and leaned back with my weight and the dirt made a sound like a wet breath. I got him out. He lay on the grass and his chest heaved. He said, do not tell anyone I almost did something dumb. He said I wanted to hear it closer. He said I think it wanted me to. We sat there with our feet dirty and our hearts beating wrong. He asked me what time it was and I said don't say it out loud. We laughed again like people do when they have avoided one kind of accident and know the other kind might still be waiting. When we stood, the surface of the grave was smooth. If I hadn't seen his shoes sink, I wouldn't have believed they had. Raoul didn't come back the next day. He called in sick. The notebook was on the office desk. I didn't open it. I trimmed bushes and talked to Mrs. Alvarez, who told me a bell is a promise again and then touched my wrist. She asked if I'd ever broken a promise to someone who was counting on it. I said yes without thinking. She nodded and walked on. She didn't leave flowers that day. She left a small bell, the kind you put on a desk, on her husband's stone. She pressed it once and flinched at the tiny ding and then smiled like she'd won something small but important. That night, I didn't go to the cemetery. I told myself I would break the habit. I would sleep. I set my phone face down and unplugged it so no alarm could find me by accident. Around 3, I woke up anyway. The house was quiet. I sat in the dark and listened to the blood in my ears. My mouth tasted like metal. I didn't hear a bell. I thought about the camera clip and the glitch and Raoul's shoe vanishing for a second, and about Danny standing with her hands on her hips like she could stop a building from falling by wanting it enough. The next day, City Hall sent a clerk to walk the grounds with a clipboard and ask questions about access and visitor hours. There had been calls. People had heard something and wanted to know if events were being held at night. The clerk had a neat beard and shoes that had never met dust. He stood in the shade of the tower and told me metal can contract and expand with temperature, and sometimes that produces tones. I said sure. He said he had taken a materials science class. I said sure. He smiled a very government smile and said that if anyone asked, I should say the city was aware of the issue and addressing it. He walked away carefully like he thought the grass might stain him. The last part is the part I keep trying to tell with different words to see if any of the versions feel safer. It was the following Sunday. The heat was worse. People moved slower. I was off that night and went with Danny to her aunt's birthday. There were folding tables under a carport and a fan that pushed hot air in circles and the sound of a soccer game from a TV in the kitchen. Danny's cousins asked me if I worked in the zombie yard and I said no. In the yard where people mind their own business. We ate cake that collapsed a little in the heat. Around midnight, Danny looked at her phone and made a face. She had started keeping an alarm for a different time, off by an hour, to trick herself. She said she wanted to call Raul and make sure he wasn't doing something dumb. I said he was home. She said she didn't trust home. We drove by anyway. His porch light was off. His truck was gone. We didn't talk. The cemetery gate is easy to get over if you have done it once. The tower in the starlight looked like a piece of a different town that someone had set down here as a joke. I don't remember getting to the grid. I just remember standing there and feeling the ground cooler than the air, like a place where water sits underneath. I remember the 3 rings and the way the third one felt like the smallest and the worst. I remember a shape at the edge of the grid, narrow and upright, not much taller than me, smudged like heat. I remember a low sound like a refrigerator hum, but slow and steady and alive. Raul's hat was on the curb again. The dirt by the worst of the sinkers had a folded look. Danny grabbed my hand hard enough to crack a knuckle and whispered, "Do you hear that?" And I said yes. The sound wasn't the bell. It was under the bell, like the bell was the echo and this was the thing speaking. It vibrated through my shoes. "If you pushed your heel into the dirt," it answered. It felt like an engine idling far down under your feet. I thought of heavy bodies in heavy boxes and the fact that Earth is not a solid thing but a million small things pressed together, and how easy it would be to shift them a little at a time. We didn't see Raul. We didn't see anyone. We stood until the hum thinned and then went home without speaking. I slept for an hour and dreamed of a grid drawn with thread and pins over a map of the city, and little weights on the thread making the pins lean. When I woke, the radio on the counter was on. I don't own a radio. The sound was a weather voice describing heat advisories, and then under it ringing. 3 tones. The smallest bell in the biggest room. Raul didn't come back the next day or the next. The city said he took early retirement. His notebook went missing from the office. Danny said his sister told her he left town with a cousin to work in oil. I went to his house after my shift and the porch light was on for the first time. There was a pair of shoes by the door covered in dust, like they had been taken off in a hurry and left out of habit. I rang the bell and no one answered. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at the cracks and thought about how everything that looks solid is just waiting for time. I kept working for a few more weeks. I tried not to watch the clock. I waved to Mrs. Alvarez and she waved back, and sometimes she would press her desk bell and smile with her mouth closed like she was keeping a secret in. The grid kept changing. We kept adding dirt. The tower kept being a tower. I did not go at night. I listened to distant trains and told myself that was what I had heard. I moved north for a job that paid better. I promised my mom I would visit twice a month, and I have kept it so far. But on the nights where I can't make the drive and the house is too quiet, I put on a podcast to fill the air and then stop it, because voices make the empty feel closer. I opened the clip we made, the one with the nothing happening in it, and I watched the bell ring without moving. I watched the glitch roll like heat across the lower part of the frame. I pause it on the middle of the second note and stare until my eyes water. If I turn the audio way up, there is a low sound underneath that isn't the bell and isn't wind and isn't electrical hiss. It is close to the frequency of a hum you make to calm yourself down. 2 nights ago, my phone set an alarm I didn't set. 3:12, no label. No previous timer. I picked it up and the note played through the speaker the way it does when you test an alarm. It was wrong for a digital tone. It was thick and tired and full. I shut the phone off and it still rang once, twice, 3 times. I held it until the casing grew warm and then cool again. I didn't sleep. This morning I woke to a voicemail from an unknown number in Laredo. 30 seconds of soft wind and then 3 tones spaced a few heartbeats apart. After the third, a tiny shift in the sound, like someone had moved their ear closer to a wall. Maybe bells are promises. Maybe they are debts. Maybe every time it rings it marks something complete that shouldn't be. I checked the cemetery news and there was nothing. No retirements. No closures. No collapses. Just a notice about drought restrictions and a photo of a new section opening up. I don't know what the bell wants. I don't know why the graves near the tower breathe in and out while the rest behave like soil. I don't know what Raul wanted to hear that he couldn't hear unless he risked being taken. I only know that when I drive past town now, even if I'm on the highway with the windows up and the radio on, there's a point where the hair on my arm stands up and I check the clock and it is always around the same time. I think about stopping. I think about not stopping. I think about the dirt receiving a heel or a toe as if it has been waiting for just that amount of weight. If you hear it, stand still and listen. That's what Raoul told me. He said the brick tells it first, then the metal. If you can hear the brick, you're too close. If you can't hear anything, your phone might. Mine rings once, twice, 3 times, whether I ask it to or not. I've started leaving it in the kitchen at night. It still finds me. The sound comes through the house the way a smell does, soft and sure. I tell myself it's a trick of habit. Then I remember that habit doesn't move dirt. Something does. I think the bell has nothing to do with the dead wanting attention. I think it's the living keeping count without knowing they are. Every night it marks what the earth is owed. When it rings, something settles a little deeper and the ground becomes smoother. When it doesn't, the dogs sleep. I don't have a moral or a warning besides the obvious one. Don't go touch the tower. Don't lean close to the brick. Don't stand on the grid and test the ground with your heel. If you do, and if you feel the answer come up through your shoe, you will understand something ordinary and terrible. You will understand how easy it is to sink without leaving a footprint. You will understand how a note can be pulled out of metal by a hand you can't see, and you will check the clock for the rest of your life, even when you've thrown the clocks away. I didn't grow up on ghost stories. I grew up in Houston traffic and strip malls, a kid who thought cemeteries were just quiet parks where your shoes sank a little into the ground. I moved to Galveston last fall to get a cheaper place and a slower life after a long, annoying breakup. I found a small upstairs apartment near the Strand with crooked floors and a clawfoot tub that never drained right. My first month, I learned the island by sound more than sight. Gulls like short laughs, the ferry horns groaning, loose shutters drumming in the onshore wind. If you live here long enough, you start waking up before sunrise whether you mean to or not. The air pushes through the window screens, and it smells like wet iron and salt and something older than both. That's when I first started walking. There's a cluster of old graveyards in the middle of the island, stitched together with iron fencing and crushed shell paths. People just call it Old City Cemetery, like it's one big thing, but it's really a patchwork. Stone angels lean. At weird angles, marble lilies swallow back into the earth, and a few vaults sit on top of the ground because water wins here, even against the dead. Moss strips hang off the live oaks like thin curtains. I'd cut through there on my way to the cafe where I worked the morning shift. It felt harmless. It was never quiet there, not really. You could hear the low hum of the island waking up, tires on Broadway, a far-off siren that I never saw, somebody's radio from a porch one street over, and sometimes the bells from a church I couldn't find. I started seeing offerings that I didn't understand. Pea-sized seashells stacked in 3s on a child's headstone, 3 pennies on one corner of a marble bench, all facing the same way. A single white ribbon tied at ankle height on a little iron fence. The bench was what stuck with me. It cooled the air around it by a couple degrees. Not all the time, not obviously. Just enough that the hair on my forearms would pop up and I'd catch myself holding my breath. The inscription was worn down to a pale shadow of letters. I could only make out a first name, L. Something. And the dates that didn't fit a full life. A footed marble base, smoothed by 100 years of hands and rain. I don't know why I started bringing coins to leave there. Maybe because I thought that was what people did on the island, like keeping a spare towel in your trunk. Maybe I wanted to blend in with the quiet kindness of it all. The story came to me sideways, like a joke told in a line. A trolley tour passed me one Saturday afternoon, the guide with a microphone tucked under her chin. I caught, and some visitors say she sits on the bench every dawn in a white dress. If you talk to her, she's gone. But check your footage later. People laughed. I didn't. I felt that stupid cold trail down my back like the time I almost got rear-ended on I-45. That night I brought it up to Hannah, a bartender I'd become friends with, and Luis, one of the cooks. We'd closed the cafe early because of rain and were stacking chairs when I said, "Have you heard about the kid on the bench?" Hannah said without looking up from the register, "Don't say her name on the way there. That's the thing. No names until you leave." Her voice was careful, like she was repeating instructions for a machine with sharp moving parts. Luis laughed and said, "Man, every coastal town's got a girl in white. It's the default ghost. I bet if we go, there's just a neighbor's kid messing with tourists." I told them I walked there most mornings and I didn't see kids. Not at that hour, just runners and a couple of older guys who looked like they'd always been there. Hannah asked what I did when I passed the bench. I told her I tried not to look like I was trying not to look. She said, "If you go, don't sit on it. That's what old Mr. Dupree on Church Street told me. He says that's for her. He's one of those groundskeeper types who knows every name." "Let's go," Louis said. "I'll bring my phone. We'll make TikToks for your haunted latte brand." We met before dawn the following Tuesday. The island had that heavy dimness it gets before the sun decides what kind of day it wants to be. The palms in the medians were still, like they were holding their breath too. We parked 2 streets over because it felt rude to pull right up to the gates. Hannah had a cheap thermos of coffee that she poured into the 3 paper cups she'd stuffed in her hoodie pocket. Luis wore a beanie even though it wasn't that cold, and had his phone in his hand with the light turned way down. The cemetery didn't look like a place for anything dramatic. It looked like what it had always been, a part of the city, with cracked curbs and low brick edges and ground that rose and sank like someone breathing slow under a sheet. We followed the path until it hooked left around a plot with 2 stone lambs guarding it. It was strange walking toward a small piece of stone like it had gravity. We heard a jogger pass on the sidewalk outside the fence, their shoes soft on the wet concrete. A delivery truck coughed and moved on. I thought about the bench the entire time and also tried not to think about it, and ended up thinking about how hard it is to think about not thinking. We saw her all at once, like a magic eye picture snapping into place. A little girl sitting on the bench. I had expected hazy edges, something smudged, something you could pretend was fog. This was crisp. This was the shock of seeing a kid out at the wrong hour. She wore a white dress that might have been cotton, or linen long enough to cover her knees, and her ankles were bare. Her hair was long and dark, heavy with damp. She sat with her hands folded in her lap the way kids never sit anymore unless someone taught them to be still. She looked to the left, toward a row of family plots, like she was waiting for someone late. "Jesus," Luis breathed. He squeezed my arm and I wanted to tell him to stop because it actually hurt, but I didn't because it felt like the kind of pain that reminded you were still in your body. Hannah didn't touch either of us. She stood a half step behind as if standing square on would draw attention. She whispered, "Don't say anything. I mean it." We were 10 feet away. Less. There was a light fog rising from the grass, not enough to hide but enough to layer the air. The edges of the marble were damp and shining. I realized suddenly and without reason that the bench would be cold to sit on, the kind of cold that gets into your clothes. The girl, if that's what she was, swung her feet once, not enough to disturb the hem of her dress. It felt like the world was very carefully holding a pose for a photographer. I was the one who broke it. Not by speaking. I didn't. I raised my phone, just to frame it. Just to say later that I had seen what I had seen. The screen showed the bench and the angle and the pale dress. I was careful not to say her name, which I didn't know anyway. My mouth went dry hard enough that I could hear my tongue pull at the roof of it. The girl turned her head toward us. Not all the way. The way kids turn their attention when they're checking if their parents watching them on the playground. Her face was not scary. It looked like a child's face in soft morning light, which somehow was worse. Hannah took my wrist and lowered the phone. Her finger brushed the volume buttons and the phone chirped, too bright in the hush. That was enough. The girl looked at us and then she didn't look at us because she wasn't there anymore. The bench held air and the damp impression of nothing. Luis whispered, "Oh man," then louder, "Oh man," like he wanted the second one to sound casual. He reached for the bench, stopped, and put his hand on the curved arm of a wrought iron fence instead. "Did you see her blink?" "We didn't say anything," Hannah said. She sounded both relieved and disappointed. "Let's go." We didn't run. That felt important. We walked the way people walk out of a church after a funeral. At the edge of the fence line, a man with a yellow city maintenance vest stood, talking quietly to a woman I took to be his co-worker. He looked up as we passed, and gave us the kind of nod locals give people doing something mildly dumb, but not yet worth correcting. If he knew what we had seen, he didn't say. We got back to the car. It was only then that I remembered I had filmed, briefly, accidentally. My thumb had slid. I said, "I want to check something," and set my phone on the hood, hit play. The footage was shaky for the first seconds, then steadied as my hands did. There was the bench, there was the dress. It looked flatter on screen, less real and somehow more likely. I didn't say anything on the clip. None of us did. We held the breath of it. And then, when the girl turned her head a little, I heard myself whisper, "Are you waiting for someone?" The sound of my voice in the recording hit me in the ribs. I hadn't spoken. I would have sworn it on anything you asked me to swear on. Luis cursed under his breath. Hannah grabbed my forearm and squeezed hard, the way you do when you test if someone is awake. From the phone speaker, a second voice answered, soft and close and behind the camera. It was a small voice, clear enough to feel like breathing. It said, "I'm here." I know how that reads. You watch a weird low-light video and you hear something that might be anything, and you make it a sentence because brains like sentences. But this wasn't the wind in the grass. This was a voice, almost in my ear, in the space where my neck was bare above my hoodie. I turned around like an idiot, as if the past could still be there behind me instead of the present. We played it again. Same thing. No matter how I turned the volume up and down, no matter how I stood or angled the phone, it always felt like it came from behind my hand. We didn't talk in the car on the way back, not about what it could be or what it was like. We didn't want to say anything that would make it more solid. That week, I heard it every morning when my alarm went off. I set my phone on the dresser every night, screen downward, because otherwise the blue square lit the whole room. 5:55, 6, 6:10, 3 mornings in a row when I grabbed it from the dark, the playback screen was up. The clip paused at the exact frame where the girl's head turned. It felt like catching yourself in the mirror in an unfamiliar hallway. I went back alone on Thursday because I wanted to prove to myself that group psychology was part of it. The air was heavier, the way it is a day before a storm. Seagulls were quiet. I walked a loop first and nodded at a woman walking a dog on the sidewalk outside the fence. A city truck idled at the corner. A man in a cap leaned against it, drinking something from a styrofoam cup, watching the intersection like he was guarding it. He looked like every man who's ever stood with his feet set at that angle because his knees hurt and his back hurts, and if he shifts, it'll feel worse later. "Morning," he said when I got close. His voice had the rasp of someone who still smoked even though he wasn't supposed to. "Morning," I said. "Do you know if they're doing work in there today?" He looked past me at the fence and said, "They're always doing work in there." "Have you ever seen her?" I said, immediately regretting it. He lifted one shoulder. "Saw a lot in my time. You don't want to talk to anything you can't talk to the same way every day." "I didn't," I said. "Talk, I mean." He looked at my phone in my hand like it was a little animal that might bite. "That's not what counts," he said, and went back to staring down the street. I didn't see her that day. I sat on a low brick border and pretended to retie my shoe. I drank half a bottle of water and poured the rest on a plant that looked like it needed it. When I went home, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number I didn't know. I hit play. It was silence for 7 seconds. Then the same small voice said, "I'm here," and the line clicked off. I didn't tell Hannah or Luis right away, not because I didn't trust them, but because saying it would turn it into a story we kept telling like we were polishing it. I tried to be normal. Work, laundry, a clogged sink that I tried to fix without calling my landlord and ended up making worse. On Sunday, after the morning rush, Hannah said without preamble, "I went by with my cousin today. We saw her. We didn't say her name. We didn't say anything. When I got back in the car, my Maps app had started routing me somewhere over the bay, like into the water. It wouldn't stop until I turned the phone all the way off." Luis said, "You two are in too deep. I'm bringing a tripod. I'm going to set it up and we're going to solve this for TikTok science." "Don't be that guy," Hannah said. But he was already on his phone, ordering a little clip-on mic to pick up whispers. We went the following Wednesday, a day and a half before a front was due to blow through. You could feel it gathering. The air was warm, but the wind had teeth at the edges. Clouds ran west to east like they were being pulled on a string. The oyster shells on the path crackled under our shoes. Someone had left a small toy horse by the bench. It was plastic and scuffed and missing one eye. Luis set up his tripod across the path and clipped the mic to his collar. He laid his other phone on the ground to get a low angle, the way people do when they're trying to make small things look dramatic. Hannah stood with her hands in her jacket pockets and stared toward the bench with a steady attention that made her look older. "She won't come out if you make it into a show," a voice said behind us. We all turned. The man from the city truck leaned on the fence 3 yards away inside the gate now. He held the styrofoam cup in one hand like it weighed something odd. I couldn't tell if it was coffee or water or nothing. "You need to leave her alone." "We're not bothering her," Luis said. "Not rude, just automatic, the way people say. We were leaving when they get caught. Talking isn't the only way to bother something," the man said. He walked along the path toward us, slow enough that his boots didn't scuff. Up close, I could see that his eyes were the pale, faded blue that happens to eyes that have watched a lot of bright sky. "You two," he said to me and Hannah, "were quiet enough the first time." "That's good. You, though." He nodded at Luis. "Your laugh carries. It's not a sin. It's just loud." "I won't laugh," Luis said. His mouth flattened, offended into silence. "Don't sit down," the man said, "even if you think it's a joke. Sitting is what binds. Talking is what invites. Listening is what keeps you safe. People forget the listening part." "Do you work here?" I asked. He gave me a long, tired look like I'd missed the point. "I'm here a lot," he said. "My folks are in the ground and so's my girl." He looked away when he said that and took a swallow from the cup like he needed to wash the sentence down. "That front's coming in hard. Wind'll say things it doesn't mean. Don't let it tell you how to feel. Stand where you can see the street. Breathe when the horns sound, and if she looks at you, keep your hands to yourself." He walked past us and kept going toward a corner where the fence kinked around a live oak. He didn't look back, we waited. I tried to listen the way he'd said. The island spoke. A tiny rattle from a palm frond. A truck changing gears. A flag slapping a pole 2 blocks away. The low, long moan of a ship horn that folded itself into the wind like a warning that wasn't urgent yet. Between those sounds you could hear another layer. The wet whisper of the grass, the little tick of something settling under a stone. The feather-soft rush of breath. At some point I realized that my hands were clenched into fists and I told them silently to stop. She was there. 1 second the bench was a bench. The next it was a bench with a small person on it. The white dress was damp around the hem as if she had walked through wet. Her hair, darker than the dress, clung to the side of her face. Her hands were folded, and a pale line on one wrist made me think of a ribbon that had been there long enough to imprint the skin. She looked toward that same row of family plots as if the world were very simple and only had one direction worth watching. Luis, to his credit, didn't speak. He tapped the record button once on the tripod phone. He tapped record on the one with the mic. His eyes were bright like someone holding a secret and trying not to grin about it. We stood just where we had before at that same careful distance as if that was part of it too. I did not raise my phone. I wanted to, like wanting to scratch an itch inside a cast, but I didn't. The girl looked at us. Not fully. Enough. The wind slid cold through the cemetery as if somebody had opened a door in a house. My mind tried to do anything but hold the shape of her. It wanted to list the ingredients of my breakfast sandwich or calculate a tip or think about a grocery list. It felt like the brain's way of not staring into a light that would scald it. From behind my ear, a small voice said, "Where is my mother?" I didn't breathe for 3 whole seconds. It's a long time when you are waiting. Hannah took 1 step back. Luis didn't move. None of us answered. We didn't move our mouths. We didn't even look at each other. From the direction of the road, a car honked short twice. The girl on the bench lifted her chin a half inch like she was hearing a clock strike and needed to know which one it was. The voice behind my ear, the same one from the video, said very softly, "Say my name, I didn't know her name." That was the point. The first time I hadn't even tried. In the weird logic of fear, my mind supplied names of girls I had known in grade school. The wrong kind of remembering. I gripped my fingers together so hard I felt the beat of my pulse in my palms. The wind pushed at the iron fence and made it ring against the post with a sound like something tapping a glass. Luis's phone chimed, that small pop you get when a notification comes in from a messaging app. It came from the phone propped on the ground. His hands were nowhere near it. The screen lit the grass from below. In that light, with the wind pressing and the bench full of presents, the world felt like a stage set tilted at an angle so marbles would roll to the same low corner. On the screen, Letters formed as if someone were typing from the other side of whatever counts as a connection. It was a text to a number none of us recognized. It said, "I'm here." The girl on the bench turned her head further, almost but not quite toward us. I could see her face without seeing every detail. The lack of detail was its own kind of detail. She might have been 7, 8. The line between those numbers is thin, one hand uncurled. She set her palm on the marble next to her thigh, the way people ground themselves when they're trying not to cry. The mic clipped to Luis's shirt picked up the sound of breath that was not ours. In my own ears, I heard a soft voice very close to my right shoulder say, "If you sit with me, she'll find us." I felt the pull of that sentence the way you feel the pull of a rip current around your ankles when you've walked too far into the surf. It didn't feel evil. It felt reasonable. It felt like the logic of a child waiting on a bench for a mother who was late. It felt like the part of me that had been small and had fallen asleep in a church pew on my grandmother's shoulder. I took a half step without meaning to. My foot hit the crushed shell edge of the path and slid. Hannah caught my sleeve and said very quietly, "No." I don't think saying no made any difference except to me. It anchored something. Luis, whose whole body had shifted forward, rocked back on his heels. The girl's eyes lowered, the way you do when you know you've asked for something and you've been refused. The wind came harder then, a first slap from the incoming front, and rattled the leaves against one another until the sound was almost like speech. Over it, way out on the water, a horn sounded, long and low and steady, the way ships talk to each other when they can't see. The girl on the bench blinked. Once. She turned her face back to that row of plots, to whatever she always faced. The toy horse on the ground toppled onto its side as if a small hand had let go of it. And then there was only and exactly a bench. We didn't talk. We didn't break our rule. We left the same way we'd come, our mouths shut, our steps careful. At the gate, the man with the styrofoam cup stood like a marker planted there on purpose. He looked us each in the face and nodded once, like he was counting. "Good," he said. "It's not about proof. It's about respect." Luis looked like he was going to argue that proof was the entire point of cameras, but he didn't. He swallowed the sentence and said, "Okay." At the car, we listened. The tripod phone showed the bench and the small body, and then nothing. On the clip with the mic, my whisper-pitched voice asked, clear as glass, "Are you waiting for someone?" Even though I hadn't asked it. Then the other voice, a child's close to the mic, answered, "I'm here." The third line was the worst. It was my voice again, but not from me. It said very gently, "If you sit with me, she'll find us." We all looked at each other because if you laugh out loud in that moment, you will never forgive yourself. Hannah said, "We did good." Her mouth trembled on the last word like she had been holding it still for too long. Luis wiped his eyes with the heel of one hand like they were watering from the wind, even though the air inside the car was still and warm. The front hit that night. The rain came sideways from the Gulf, hard enough to make the old windows in my apartment breathe at the seams. I tried to sleep through it and ended up lying awake, counting between lightning and thunder like a kid. At 3 in the morning, my phone made a sound I didn't recognize. I reached for it and found the screen lit, the video open. It played itself, but it was different. The bench was empty on the screen, just marble and the gray suggestion of dawn, and the audio was full of rain. A small voice said, "Say my name." And my voice answered, "I don't know it." And the small voice laughed once, very quietly, before the clip ended. I had not recorded that. The date stamp was that morning's date, but the time was wrong. It said 1900, which was not a time a phone picks. It was a year. I turned the phone off. Not the fake off where it waits for you. The full shutdown until the apple doesn't show when you press the power and the black is just black. Even then, I could feel the sense of sound waiting behind me like a person standing in a doorway. I slept for 2 hours and dreamed about ferry benches underwater. When I woke, there were 3 pennies on my windowsill, salt tarnished, all facing the same way. I told this eventually to the man with the styrofoam cup. I found him again because I started walking again and because he was always there when the light was that exact color. He said, "Everyone in Galveston carries water in their pockets, whether they mean to or not. It leaks out at the corners and leaves things on tables. Some of those things belong to us. Some of them don't. What do I do?" I asked, because it felt like he would know or at least say something that sounded like knowledge. "Keep walking," he said. "Bring water when the plants look thirsty. Don't sit on what isn't yours. Don't answer if you didn't ask the question." And if you hear a voice right behind you at dawn, stand where you can see the street. Do you know her name? I asked before I could stop myself. He looked away toward that row of family plots and a line of oleanders shaking rain off their leaves. And he said, like someone admitting they couldn't fix a thing they'd worked on for years, I did. It's slippery now. We stopped going as a group. It wasn't a decision we made. It was just heavy to carry together. Hannah said quietly that she sometimes heard her own voice in the bar when she hadn't spoken yet, answering a question a customer hadn't asked. Luis told me he woke up once with his back cold, like he had fallen asleep sitting on something and couldn't remember getting up. He said he didn't like that feeling and he was going to stop making light of things that were heavier than him. We still worked together. We didn't pretend nothing happened. We just didn't bring it to the counter when we poured coffee for people who had been awake since 4 to make bread. I still walk there some mornings. It feels rude not to. I leave coins sometimes still, though I don't know whether it helps. I never sit on the bench. If you go, you'll know which one it is without a map. It will feel like the air is asking you a question. If you raise your phone, and you will, because that's what we do now when we want to make a moment stay, you might hear a voice when you play it back. It might be yours saying a thing you didn't say. It might be small, answering from a place that isn't in front of the lens. If it asks you to sit, don't. If it asks you to say her name, tell the truth and say you don't know it. And if you hear very softly right behind your right shoulder where your skin is bare to the air, I'm here, don't answer out loud. You'll be tempted because it sounds sane and sad and polite. Because it sounds like a person you could help if you just made your mouth move, but you don't talk to the ocean when it knocks at your back steps. Not because you don't respect it, but because it can't hear you, and it will come in anyway if it wants to. You just move what you can't replace to higher shelves and you keep walking. On this island, we all carry water. Some of us carry a little voice too. I don't know if anything wanted anything from us besides company. I don't know if she used our mouths for practice or if the wind did. I only know that some mornings when I take my phone off the charger, the video is open to the same 2 seconds of gray light, and sometimes right when the clip ends, the apartment creaks just behind my ear like someone is leaning in to tell me that they've found their seat. I've started counting the ship horns when they sound before sunrise. I breathe on the long one and I look toward the street and I keep my hands to myself. If someone calls my name from behind the camera of my life, I let it go to voicemail. I grew up thinking mesquite trees were just a nuisance. They crowd fences, drink more than their share of water, and drop thorns sharp enough to pierce a boot sole. Where I'm from in Llano County, they're more common than traffic lights. You don't think of them as a place where something could live. Not like a person. Not like a memory. Last fall I learned I was wrong, and I wish I could go back to seeing those trees as just weeds. I moved back for a few months to help my mom after her hip surgery. My uncle runs a small monument business out of a metal building on Ranch Road 152, the kind of place that cuts headstones and cleans up old cemetery plots when families can't make the drive anymore. He offered me night work and keys to the truck. It was simple. Haul water, scrub marble, trim brush, keep an eye out for kids drinking in graveyards. The job wasn't creepy in the way people expect. Most nights it was crickets and distant dogs and a sky so full of stars you could almost hear them. If you grew up there, you know what I mean. 2 friends from high school were still around. Mateo was a groundskeeper for the county and had the calm energy of a guy who'd seen too many rattlesnakes to get worked up about much. Danny was the assistant at the weekly paper. She could make any rumor sound like a story, which is probably how the whole thing started for us. She called one afternoon while I was cleaning limestone off a tomb with a toothbrush. "Have you been out to the Pioneer plot?" she asked. The little fenced square off the county road by the old windmill. People keep sending me messages about a light. They don't want me to print names, but they all describe the same thing. A lantern moving through the mesquite, no person. Just the light. I told her it was probably a rancher checking fence line with a headlamp. We hung up and I forgot about it until later that week when my uncle gave me a list. 3 stones to clean at the Pioneer plot, a survey flag to replace that had disappeared, and a note in his block printing that said, "If you see Roy, tell him the invoice is in the glove box." Roy was the volunteer caretaker. He showed up with a thermos and a straw hat whenever we worked out there. He also had a habit of standing so still you forgot he'd arrived. The Pioneer plot is not a real cemetery the way city people imagine one. It's a rectangle of iron fence sunk into caliche soil. big enough for maybe 15 graves. The stones are hand-chiseled names that go back to the 1870s, some marked only with baby. Mesquite trees lean over the fence as if the plot is a puddle they're drinking from, and prickly pear pads creep right up to the posts. That afternoon the wind barely moved, and the cicadas were singing in a way that made the air feel electric. I hosed down the stones, let the water sink, and turned the dust into paste and got to work. Roy wandered up without a sound about an hour in, his thermos swinging at his side. He watched me scrub the last name on the list, a boy who hadn't made it past 6. The letters swallowed the water and turned darker like they were pulling it in. "You hear about the light," Roy said. Not asked, said. "I hear about a lot of lights," I told him. "Most of them end up being someone's teenager wearing that stupid forehead strap. This one doesn't throw any shadow," he said. "Watch the mesquite around it when it moves. No shadow, it's old. Older than that fence? Older than a lantern?" I said, trying to keep it friendly. He shrugged. "Call it what your head can hold. People follow it and think they're walking straight. Come sunrise, they'll be standing right here by the fence, and the ground is carved up with their footprints like they danced in circles all night. And sometimes there's writing in the dust inside those circles. Names." "Writing," I said. "Names," he said, and finished his coffee. "I've swept them. I've hosed them. They come back with new people. That's why I don't like anyone out here after dark." I didn't tell him Danny had already texted a simple plan. Meet at the gate at 10 with chairs, a cooler, and the good camera from the paper. Mateo texted a thumbs up and warned us he'd only stay till midnight because the county had him on a mow-and-blow job at sunrise. They were both careful people. We weren't the kind to fumble into a hole or spook ourselves for fun. I figured we'd sit, hear a truck on a distant road, watch a few shooting stars, and go home. We met at the cattle guard a few minutes past 10. The night had cooled into one of those perfect hill country evenings where the Milky Way looks like a spill of flour across the sky. Danny handed me a folding chair and set the camera on a tripod pointing toward the mesquite. Mateo leaned on the fence and listened, eyes closed, the way he always did at the start of a night outside. "If it's real, it'll show," Danny said. "If it's not, at least I get a paragraph about people freaking out over the full moon." "It's not a full moon," Mateo said without opening his eyes. "It's last quarter. Gives you that soft light, but not enough to see a snake in the grass." We waited, about half an hour, and a nighthawk dove overhead, letting out that hollow sound they make when they cut air with their wings. A dog barked twice from a far-off porch. Somewhere down on the river, the slow talk of water moving over rock rolled up toward us. It was quiet in a way big cities never let you have. The kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat feel like a noise. A smell reached us before the light did. Kerosene is a plain smell, but you never forget it if you grew up rural. It has weight, like a memory of winter and glass lamps and the turn of a cold metal knob. It came across the fence as if whoever carried it was still 100 yards away. Mateo opened his eyes and straightened. "You smell that?" Danny checked the wind on her wrist with a lick of her finger. "Barely moving toward us." "Then the source is south," I said. Even though I knew every wrong move in the dark begins with somebody stating something obvious like it's wisdom. The light appeared between two mesquites like someone raising a lantern chest high. Not a glare, a warm bloom that held steady. I watched the branches around it for the way fire should skip and flicker. There wasn't any of that. The mesquite leaves didn't glow. No shadow shifted. The light was just there, moving steadily to the right at a walking pace and then pausing, as if whoever held it bent to look at something on the ground. Danny muttered that she had it in frame. Mateo said he didn't like that it made no noise. I said we should call out and tell whoever it was that we were here so we didn't startle each other. As I said it, the light drifted left and stopped again. We stood. The wind ticked a chain where the fence gate was wired shut. "Hey there," I called, loud and friendly. "We're here working a story. You okay out there?" "Nothing." The light moved a little closer. 10 yards, maybe more. It's hard to judge and scrub at night. It was still at chest height. At that distance, you expect to see the faint suggestion of shoulders or a shape behind a glow. The light had no source. It floated inside itself. The smell of kerosene was stronger, and my tongue picked up a taste like a coin. Danny kept the camera steady. Mateo stepped to the gate and ran a palm over the wire as if to test how quickly he could undo it. "We're not following it," he said, more to himself than to us. The light slid right, paused, slid back. It made a U, then traced that U again like a hand explaining a simple motion to a child. I don't know how long we watched that slow, patient gesture. It worked on the part of your brain that wants to make patterns. The light repeated the curve one more time and then turned, easing away between the trunks. Not fast enough to be a tease, not slow enough to insult us, like it knew exactly how people move when they think they're leading. We stood there trying to say nothing first, as if words could make us the ones in control. In the end, I was the one who said we should at least walk to the fence line and see where it went. We weren't going to chase it, just mark the direction. That was the promise we made out loud, so the promise inside, the one about not doing anything dumb, felt intact. We unwired the gate. The wire was cooler than the air, so cold it stung. We stepped out and the ground changed from the thin grass inside the fence to dust that had been driven the consistency of talc by decades of hooves and boots. It took our footprints clearly. We followed the light the way you shadow a stranger in a store, careful not to gain or lose distance. It led us into a path mesquites make when they grow with just enough space for a person to pass. The branches arched and brushed our shoulders with little dry sighs. Prickly pear cracked under our soles. The light held steady ahead. Sometimes it paused over places where the dust was scuffed as if by coyotes. Sometimes it drifted so close a thorn cast a pinprick star through it and onto my shirt. Each time I thought I'd feel heat when we neared it. I never did. "Stop," Mateo said softly after a while, and we did all at once like dancers. Look back. The fence and the gate were gone into dark. We hadn't gone far. I could still hear the little chain tapping, only now it sounded as if it was on the other side of something thick. I turned back around and the light had moved forward and left and now sat still, framed in a little clearing where the dust lay smoother than elsewhere. The mesquite around that patch looked like it had tried to grow inward and then changed its mind. The light slid in a slow circle along the edge of the clearing. We stayed where we were, all of us feeling that rope collar tug that makes people step into traffic when they shouldn't. The light traced the circle again, perfect as if the ground had a groove in it. Then it stopped and flared just once, a small breath of brightness. Something was written in the dust ahead where it had traced. I saw it first as broken lines, then letters, then a word. It was my name. Not the short version people call me by, but the full thing my mother uses when she's serious. The letters were neat. Not careful like someone trying to be neat. Neat like a person who always writes that way. The dust between the strokes looked combed with something thin like a stiff brush. I felt my chest try to expand too fast. Danny let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "That's not funny," she said, meaning it to someone who wasn't there. To the right of mine, another name was cut in the powder. Danny's, full and exact, the accent mark she hates flat and gone because dust doesn't do accents. Between ours and a third space blank, the dust showed faint arcs that weren't there a minute ago. The arcs laid over the ground like pale ribs, each a piece of a circle, all of them sharing the same center point. Boot prints touched and overlapped. They were ours and they were not. The pattern was right and wrong at the same time, like hearing your own voice on a recording for the first time. The light moved and traced the circle again, slower, as if to be clear. Then it turned slightly toward the blank space where a third name would sit and held there, waiting. It did not lift or lower. It did not flicker with the wind. The kerosene smell was close enough to make my eyes water. "Don't step into that," Mateo said, voice tight in a way I'd never heard. Even when we dug out a truck that had slid into the Llano River mud one spring. "Don't anyone step into the circle." He backed up and bumped my shoulder, and my heel slid in the powder and made a mark inside one of the faint arcs. The circling prints overlapped it, but my slip was new. I stared at the line, then at the light, then back. The light flared again, smaller this time, like someone nodding privately. We all felt it then, that gentle tug from the middle of the clearing. The pull that comes a split second before your body tips to follow the simplest arc around a thing. If gravity could choose. If it could put a finger to your sternum and suggest a direction you'd already taken before. A radio cracked behind us. The static was violent after the hush. A voice followed from the mesquite. "Stay where you are." Roy stepped into the clearing with his head down, checking his feet like a man stepping over a snake. He had a rake in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. His face looked older than when I'd seen him that afternoon. The kind of old that happens when a person hasn't slept in a bed, just in a chair, 3 nights in a row. "Don't step in the circle," he said to Mateo, who had stopped at the edge like there was glass there. Roy set the rake down with the tines outward. He didn't look at the light, which waited with what I can only call patience. He watched the dust the way a carpenter watches a saw line. "You already scuffed it," he said to me, and the disappointment in his voice made me feel 6 years old. "That's all right. We can keep you out of it." Danny asked what the name thing was in a whisper, as if the mesquite had ears. Roy shook his head. "It's what it uses. Not a threat, a measure. If you step in, you'll walk until dawn and you won't know you're doing it. And in the morning, you'll ask why there's writing with your name where your boots wore that shape. And the next time you close your eyes to pray or sleep, you'll see the ring. That's the worst part. Some people never stop seeing it." "Is that all?" Danny said. It was brave and scared at once. Roy's mouth moved like he was picking one word from a bag. "I don't know what it means after. I don't know what's owed." The light slid a foot. It waited. The smell pressed in. "I wanted to go to it the way you want to open your phone and check something that will answer nothing." I took a step that wasn't mine, and Roy snapped a line of the rope across the ground in front of my foot like he was popping a horse's flank. "Back," he said. And to my surprise, I did. He set the rope down and made a small loop with his hands as if he were handling a snake. He flicked the loop once and laid it over the arc I'd disturbed. The rope sat on the dust and seemed to sink a hair, like the ground there was softer. He did the same for a part of the ring near where Danny's name lay neat and complete. "It likes a clean line," he said. "We make it imperfect." The light did not flare this time, it dimmed. I felt something then I don't know how to describe except to say it was the opposite of attention. Imagine a crowd staring hard at you and then all of them blinking at the same time. The space in the blink is what I felt. The light turned slightly away, slow as a cow in a chute, and drifted toward the mesquite on the far side of the clearing. The rope made tiny squeaks where it dragged a grain of sand. The lantern's smell pulled with it and then thinned quickly as if a door had closed. We stood there not talking. The night resumed itself in little pieces. A moth nicked my ear. Somewhere a calf bawled. The chain at the gate tapped 3 more times and stopped. The urge to walk the circle eased like a muscle unclenching. Roy didn't scold. He stepped forward to the writing and looked at it in a practical way, like a man checking a measurement. He took a small brush from his back pocket, the kind you use to clean leather boots, and he swept one of the letters until it blurred. The dust lifted and settled in the arc lines as if drawn there. "It comes when there's new names to learn," he said, looking not at us but at the space where the light had been. "I don't know why it's here instead of anywhere else. Maybe the old graves hold on to people's ideas about who they were. Maybe the mesquite know. Maybe this ground is just easy to write in." We followed him back slowly. Every 10 steps he checked the dust behind us and nodded, like he could see something following that we could not. When the fence appeared, I felt relief hit me in a way that made me a little dizzy. Danny locked onto the tripod and folded it with hands that shook. Mateo put the wire back through the gate and twisted it shut. We drove out with both trucks, not because the rule was to never leave anyone alone, but because some rules go without saying. I tried to sleep at my mother's that night and could not. Every time I closed my eyes, the clean, neat letters in the dust flashed, and then the circle spun faster, and the angle changed so that I could see myself walking in it from above. Each time I opened my eyes, the ceiling fan shadow made a slow little arc on the wall, and my chest tightened. At 3 in the morning, I went to the kitchen to drink water straight from the tap and found grit in my teeth where there shouldn't have been any. I told myself it was in my head. The next day, the 3 of us met without saying we were meeting. It felt wrong to go to work, wrong to be regular. We gathered on the courthouse square by the old sandstone building where the shade sits like a gift. Danny had the camera card and said the footage was nothing but static flares where the light had been, like the lens refused to process it. Mateo said he'd woken with a small ring of pale dust on the mat inside his front door. I said the same thing about grit in my teeth and hated myself for how superstitious it sounded. Roy called me that afternoon and asked for the camera card. I asked him why. He said he didn't care about photos. He wanted to see where the camera had pointed when the light had been in the clearing. He had a way of asking without pushing that made you answer. I brought it to him near sunset. He sat on the tailgate of his truck and scrubbed at the card with his thumbnail while he talked. "You don't have to go back," he said. "Some folks can just not go back and it loosens its hold. Others get the itch. They want to look at what wrote their name. They want to see if it'll write it again. I can't tell which kind you are. I can tell you that if you go back, go where the ground is rocky and loud. Don't go where the dust is deep. And if you feel like you're doing what you've already done, you probably are." I said something about closure that sounded dumb even to me. He smiled without his mouth, the way older men do when they've learned a thing you're about to learn the hard way. We did not plan to return that night. We said it out loud in a little ceremony like we meant it, but after dinner I found myself driving the county road with the window down, telling myself I was going to look at stars from the wide shoulder. The truck slowed by its own habit near the cattle guard. Mateo's taillights cut red arcs up ahead and Danny's little hatchback tucked in behind. None of us put our blinker on. None of us waved. We parked the way people park outside a church when they haven't been inside in too long. The air was warmer than the night before. The wind had shifted. The mesquite had that paper sound they get when their leaves rub together. We didn't open the gate. We stood with our hands on the metal and watched the shadows. It would have been easy to pretend we were there to check that nothing was amiss and then leave proud of ourselves. The lantern lit where the fence turned a corner, as if it had been there the whole time, holding its breath. The smell of kerosene came across the cattle guard and snuck under my tongue. The light did not move. It waited, and in that waiting there was a weight I felt like a hand on my back. I reached for the wire. Mateo put his hand on my wrist. The way he said my name sounded like the old days when he'd say it to pull me back from something stupid in shop class. Danny swallowed and said, "Just the fence. Just the fence line." We stepped along it, staying inside, the metal bumping my hip. The light cruised parallel with us, matching our pace without hurry. Halfway down the fence, we reached a spot where the ground dipped and held a little pan of dust that no rain had touched. Even inside the fence, you could read it like a page. The light paused at the same level outside. I don't remember who leaned first. I don't remember whose breath hitched. What I remember is the letters appearing in that shallow pan without a finger, without a stick. Like frost on glass, like a slug trail drying, like something chemical happening under the surface. They rose into clarity. It wrote my full name again. It wrote Danny's. And in the third space it made a line and began a letter that wasn't a letter yet. Just a curve. A commitment to a shape. The air thinned. The fence pressed the notion of boundaries into my side, insufficient and absolute. A truck came fast down the road then, a county truck with a light bar clicking and a door that read, Sheriff's Office. The brakes hissed and the gravel popped and Deputy Carla Ellis stepped out with her hat in her hand. She saw the lantern and did what I'll always respect her for. She didn't pull her flashlight or her weapon. She didn't shout. She took her hat and swept it across the top of the dustpan we were staring at just once in a hard, clean wipe, and blurred everything. The letters smeared and broke and fell back into nothing like a sandcastle kicked at the right moment. The light went dull. Not out, but dull, as if someone put cloth over it. Deputy Ellis nodded once like she'd cut a wire that needed cutting. She put the hat back on her head and hooked her thumbs in her belt. "Roy called," she said. "He said you might come back. You don't need a citation to know a bad idea." No one argued. We walked to our trucks in a line that felt like a small parade for the living. The lantern drifted away into the mesquite as if it had somewhere else to be. When I drove home, every curve in the road looked like part of a larger circle I hadn't noticed before. I didn't work the cemetery jobs after that. I told my uncle I'd stick to cutting granite slabs and engraving in the shop. He shrugged. In that way he does. That means he knows there are things in the county he respects without liking. Mateo kept mowing county parks and never mentioned the place again. Danny wrote her paragraph, the kind that doesn't say anything outright but sits in your head like a seed. Roy never called about an invoice. Deputy Ellis waved when she saw me buying coffee at the Stripes and asked how my mother's hip was doing. Everything became every day again. That might be the strangest part. It's been months. I bought a cheap rug for the inside of my front door because it's easier to shake outside than to sweep. Every few mornings there's a ring of dust on it, pale and almost perfect, like a coffee cup sat there. I shake it out. I don't look too closely. I wash the truck more than I used to. I sweep off my porch. I use the back door more than the front. I haven't driven that county road after dark. I haven't, but I could. That thought scares me more than any light in the trees. If this gets to someone who needs it, here's what I can say without asking you to believe. In Llano County, there's a little pioneer plot where the mesquite lean in, and the dust takes a mark like paper. On some nights, a lantern drifts there, carried by nothing, patient as a schoolteacher. If you see it, don't follow. If you already followed, don't step into anything it makes for you, especially if it looks like you've already been walking there. If you've already stepped in, find someone who knows how to break a clean line. Sweep it, smudge it, make it imperfect. Some things in this world don't hurt you by touching you. They hurt you by memorizing you. If a light in the mesquite tries to learn your name, don't let it practice. And if you wake in the night to the smell of kerosene and the sense that you're moving in your sleep, walk to the sink, drink water, and keep your feet still. Dawn comes either way. The question is where you'll be standing when it does. I'm going to change a few names because I still work seasonally for the park, and because what I'm about to describe happened on federal property that people treat like a postcard. If you've ever visited the missions on the south side of San Antonio, San Jose, San Juan, Espada, Concepcion, you know the stone and shade, the quiet courtyards, the smell of mesquite after a hot day. You might have even walked through the little burial grounds. Most folks assume they're empty, just old walls with plaques and a few modern stones. We try not to break that illusion. It keeps people respectful. It keeps people from staying after sunset. I'm one of the rangers who close gates, check locks, and clear stragglers when the heat drops and the cicadas turn the trees into a speaker. This happened over the summer, the stretch of weeks when the humidity sits on your shoulders and you hear thunder every afternoon, whether or not it actually storms. There's a section of the burial ground behind one of the missions. We call it Section K on our maps. There's no big sign for it. The letters are administrative, scribbled on grid sheets, the way we keep track of maintenance requests and marker locations. Section K is a rectangle of ground set back from the main path, behind a low wall of weathered stone where the plaster gave up years ago. A few newer graves have stones with names. Most of the rest are simple. You can tell them by the swell in the earth and the way the grass grows a richer green over them in spring. The first time I heard the singing, it was close to 9 at night, that scene where the sun is gone but the heat hasn't learned it yet. I was with Elena, another seasonal. She grew up on the south side, knows every panaderia and shortcut, and treats the missions like her family's front yard. We were finishing a last sweep because we'd had a quinceañera photo shoot try to hide behind the chapel earlier. It happens. People love good light. We were walking the path that skirts the acequia, light bouncing off the stone and water, when the sound floated up from the far end of the graves. It wasn't words. If you asked me then, I would have said someone left a radio on low in a house 2 blocks over, and the breeze was bringing it in sideways. It had the shape of a hymn without the skeleton of language, the kind of melody your mouth might hum when you're alone and not thinking. Slow. A little up, a little down. Old but not church old. If that makes any sense. Do you hear that? Elena asked, and we both stopped. Cicadas buzzed. A train horn bent the distance in half. The melody kept weaving through it, pale thread in a rough blanket. Someone's got a speaker, I said, because it was easier. Probably teens. Elena shook her head. It's come from Section K and you don't hear a beat. She was right. No bass, no click of a hi-hat. Just a voice that wasn't a voice, a note that wasn't exactly a note. It rose and fell like breath. We walked to the low wall and stood with our forearms on it like we were casual, like we were waiting for a friend. The grass inside was dark. The dates on the closest stones glinted like teeth. The acequia gurgled. I tried to judge the direction. The sound didn't care about direction. Our radios crackled with Mateo's voice back at the station. He was our night security contractor, retired Air Force, always half a joke away from a story. You too good out there? Yeah, Elena said, thumb on the mic. Just closing up. Do you hear anything on the cameras? Anyone in the cemetery? Negative, he said. Camera on the gate is clean. I'm watching your lights. Elena let go of the mic. The singing did a slow climb and then fell back. It never broke. It never paused to breathe. It never made itself into words. The hair along my forearms stood up without my permission. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to sound like I was telling a ghost story to my partner on a Tuesday. We finished the sweep. We locked the iron gates. Elena made sure the chain lay behind the posts the way she always does. Neat, no clatter to spook birds. The singing was still there as we walked away. We didn't talk about it. We also didn't mention it in the log, because there was a weird sound makes you look like the kid who can't handle dusk. The second night it was back. This time it started earlier, right after the last tour group left. You could see the heat moving on the stone like a transparent animal. I was alone near Section K, picking up the plastic water bottles people hide in shrubs. The melody slipped out from between the markers like a draft through a door you thought was closed. I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe it was the way the wind moved across the rim of the acequia, like blowing across a bottle. Maybe it was a harmonics thing. I leaned close to see if it got louder near the water. It didn't. I moved toward the wall. Same volume. I stood in the path. Same. A volunteer docents group was finishing up by the chapel. One of them, an older man in a straw hat, heard it and laughed softly like he recognized a song but couldn't remember the name. He started humming along. It was almost a joke at first, his hum a different tune, a little faster and brighter. Some ranchera hook he probably grew up with. The melody from Section K rolled on, unbothered. He kept humming. And then something that I still don't understand happened. The not-quite voice from the graves bent. It curved its line to meet his. It didn't copy him exactly. It moved like water poured into a new shape. The man stopped, surprised. He looked at me, eyebrows up. I tried to laugh with him because I didn't want my face to give anything away. "Need echo," I said. My throat felt dry. He hummed again, a different pattern, testing it like you test a dog's trick. The melody inside the fence followed him a beat later. Like a child who wants to learn and is already better at it than you are. The older man's smile faltered. He shook his head, went back to his group, and didn't hum again. I didn't tell Elena that part. Not yet. I told myself I was adding details that weren't real. Sometimes if you look at a tree long enough in the dark, it looks like a person, and then it stops looking like a tree. I didn't want to feed that. You can get used to anything if it happens enough. Over the next week, the singing became part of our close-up routine. It didn't happen during the day. It didn't happen in the rain, at least not that I heard. But on those clear, heavy evenings when the sky pressed down and the bats woke up under the bridge, there it was, just above the grass, a hymn without words. If no one engaged with it, it stayed itself. If someone hummed even a few notes, even by accident when they were counting keys or blowing a mosquito away, it leaned toward them, changed its path, learned their tune and laid it under itself like a second skin. Elena pretended not to notice it the first few times. She has this way of keeping order that's like sweeping in broad strokes, you know? Take care of the big things, the little things fall into line. The third or fourth night, when we heard it waiting for us as if we were late to our own house, she said, "Don't hum." "Who hums?" I asked. "You want to find out?" She said, and that was the end of it. We didn't hum, we told Mateo because we had to tell someone. He made a joke. La Llorona learned Ableton. And then he came out to stand with us by the wall. He is the kind of man who hums just to see if a thing will hum back. I could see it on his face, the itch. Elena elbowed him in the rib. He stuck his hands in his pockets and rocked on his heels, eyes on the ground. We brought it up with Carl, our supervisor, the next morning in that sideways way you do when you're testing, if an adult believes the thing you believe. He looked tired, like he'd had a night of a child awake at 3. He listened and didn't laugh. He nodded once and said, "Just make sure the gates are locked," as if we'd complained about bees near the visitor center door. That would have been the end of it. A story that lives in the edges of a place the way every older property has a rumor, except I made a mistake. On a Sunday, heat baking off the stone as if it had a memory, I got stuck late. Elena went to the other mission to help a family find a lost phone. Mateo was doing rounds. I took one more walk past Section K before locking the gate. The melody was there, gentle as steam. It had been a long day of answering the same questions, and without thinking, without meaning to, I hummed 2 notes, a low one and then a higher one. Just something my throat made because that's what throats do when they're tired and want to soothe themselves. Simple. 2 notes. Almost nothing at all, it answered me. The moment my breath died in my mouth, the melody pitched up. I felt the answering note more than heard it, like pressure somewhere behind my ears changing in an elevator. The second note followed, tucked under mine by half a heartbeat, not quite echo, not quite copy. My scalp prickled. I felt ridiculous and then afraid in the same breath, because my first thought was that I had just taught something my name. I locked the gate in a hurry and pretended the chain fought more than usual. I walked away too quickly, keys ringing. The song didn't stop. It followed at that same steady volume, not closer, not farther. You learn how sound acts in places. You know when you're leaving it behind. This one walked with me. It kept walking when I crossed the parking lot, when I got in my car, when I closed the door and the world compressed to air conditioning and fabric, I still heard it. The notes I hummed were small. The ones behind me were patient. On the drive home, it hid in the sound of my tires on the highway and the thin whine that lives in the gap between gear shifts. At stoplights where the city has its own kind of choir, buses, bass from cars, the rattling hum of neon, It surfaced clean. 2 notes, then their climb. I turned the radio on to drown it and turned the radio off because it threaded itself through the music like a hair in a bowl of soup. I cracked my window. Hot night air slid in, smelling like dust and meat smoke and cilantro from the taco truck under the overpass. The melody perched there too, light as ash. At home, the window unit in my apartment made a constant white roar. You can sleep under that kind of sound. The melody tucked itself inside it as if my machine had been designed for this purpose. When the compressor clicked off, the 2 notes hung naked in the room for a heartbeat before my ears decided to pretend they weren't there. I paced the small rectangle of kitchen and living room and tried to convince myself that I had just given myself a song to fixate on. The way you get a jingle stuck in your head and hate yourself for feeding it. I ran water in the sink and it braided with that. The way water sings copper to itself in old pipes. I turned on the bathroom fan to add another layer and it learned the fan too. I called Elena at 10. "Do you hear it at your place?" I asked and heard how dumb I sounded in the act of saying it. "What?" she said. She was at her mom's house that night. Kids were laughing in the background, a TV murmuring soccer. "No, why?" "No reason," I lied. Wrote something in the little notebook by my bed as if writing could pin the sound down where it couldn't move. I slept badly. The song didn't get louder. It kept the same volume, the same patience, the same sense of something practiced and willing to wait. In the morning, when I turned on the shower, it lingered in the steam and tile, in the hum of the fridge, in the minute ring of the metal vent around the stove like somebody running a wet finger around a crystal glass. I didn't tell anyone. I went to work. I made a point of staying on the far side of the property the next few evenings. It didn't matter. The melody from Section K still met us at closing, the way wind meets you at a door. I ignored it. I didn't hum again. It didn't care. It had what it needed from me. 2 nights later, an elderly woman came by just before we closed. She had a tote bag and a careful way of stepping off the path as if the earth could be offended by the weight she put on it. She asked if she could leave flowers on her great-aunt's grave. We usually don't allow after-hours visits, but she had names and dates and a way of speaking that could shame a stricter ranger than me. Elena took her to the stone. I stood back by the wall because I didn't want to be inside that boundary when the light started flattening things. The woman arranged her flowers. The singing swelled a little as if the ground itself took a breath. She didn't seem to hear it. Or maybe she heard it and knew better than us not to name it. She kissed her fingers and touched the top of the stone and walked back to the path. And as she passed me, she hummed without thinking. Not a tune, just a human sound of goodbye. The melody changed. The note her mouth made slid into that other voice. The woman stopped as if someone had taken hold of her elbow. "What is that?" she asked me, her eyes reflecting the sky. "Wind," I said immediately. "Water in the acequia. Sometimes it sings." She looked at me as if she could tell I was lying and kindly decided to let me keep my lie. "It followed my mother home once," she said softly, not to me but to the air. And then she left, slow steps, the flowers bright against the stone behind us. Elena heard her. Her jaw ticked once like a muscle remembering an old injury. That night she said, "We should talk to Father Luis, the mission priest who still says Mass on Sundays and helps us at funerals." I wanted to say yes. I also didn't want to involve anyone else. Bringing another adult into a child's secret can make the secret into a rule. We put it off. We were short-handed. A storm knocked branches down at San Juan. Someone scratched a vulgar word into the stucco and needed to be written up. The melody kept the same schedule. The climax, if that's what you want to call it, came in the middle of July after the kind of afternoon where the sky piles up purple and never delivers. That night the air felt like a warm cloth on a fever. We did our rounds. The song was already there when our boots touched the path to Section K. It sounded closer even though it never changed volume. Close is not always loud. Sometimes close is just the knowledge that if you reached your hand out, you'd touch the mouth it was coming from. Mateo came out with us because he had the same itch he masked with jokes. He had a flashlight big enough to seem like an argument and a rosary his grandmother gave him. He didn't hold the beads like a movie would show you. He just wrapped them around his fingers the way you wrap tape around a cut to keep it closed. Elena said, "We don't hum." And we nodded because we were smart enough to be superstitious. We walked the boundary of the wall and made sure the gate was secure. The iron vibrated with ordinary night sounds. The small tapping of insects, the open-throated chorus of the trees. The melody rose and fell, and in its center, I heard my 2 notes stretched and braided into something that wasn't mine anymore. I wanted to apologize for teaching it something so little. We stood there longer than we needed to, not because we had a plan, but because leaving didn't feel like the right answer. The moon lit the stones with a kind of soft cruelty. It was bright enough that we could see every bug that skated the surface of the acequia, every ripple like a sketch. Mateo told a story about night training in Del Rio, just to set a human sound in the air that wasn't a song. Elena listened with her mouth align. I watched the grass. People always ask, "Did you see anything?" As if seeing would make sense of it. I didn't see a woman in white or a procession with candles. I saw what the grass does when something heavier than wind moves through it. I saw very faint depressions where no one had stepped and where a foot might have pressed if there had been feet. The melody didn't change to acknowledge this, and that made it worse. It kept steady. It kept patient. The tiny indentations in the grass moved toward the gate and stopped there like someone standing with their hands around the iron bars to sing through them. "Enough," Elena said. Not to us, to the air. She took 1 step toward the gate in a courage I don't pretend to have. Her jaw worked as if she were swallowing something bitter. For a second I thought she was going to hum in defiance, to break our rule because silence felt like surrender. She didn't. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the small bottle of holy water Luis had given us for another matter months before, and flicked a few drops onto the stone. The melody dropped a half step, a sound like a sigh you're not supposed to hear. Then in the same breath it returned to itself. It didn't get angry. It didn't retreat. It absorbed the moment like sand takes footprints and ruffles its face smooth. Mateo, who never obeyed a sign in his life, lost patience the way certain older men do. He whistled 3 notes, not a melody, just sharp sound in the air meant to snap a dog out of a bad idea. The singer inside the fence caught his whistle and made a cradle of it. It took his 3 notes the way it took mine and turned them in its mouth until they were round and warm. And then, and this is the part that makes me nauseous even writing it, it did his tone. Not his notes. The exact human color of his whistling. The exact minute warble he puts in without thinking. "Don't," Elena said, low and quick. A mother talking to someone else's child. She took Mateo's elbow. He flinched like he'd been embarrassed in front of a friend. We left. We didn't say we were retreating. We said what rangers say at night when we've done the job and the dark is bigger than we are. "Gate secure," Elena said on the radio. "Final check complete," I added. We walked away and the song followed the same way it always did, at that same thread-fine volume, not chasing, not letting go. It was louder at my apartment that night. Not in volume, in nearness. It lay under the refrigerator's hum like a bass note under a choir. It perched inside my fan and in the little fluorescent tube over my sink that always flickers before it dies. I turned the light off. The song nested inside the sound of the bulb cooling down. I covered my ears like a fool and proved to myself that sound born inside your skull behaves the same with or without your hands. I went back the next day to talk to Father Luis because there is a point at which you stop being brave and start being stupid, and I had crossed it quietly. He made coffee that tasted like it had been on the hot plate since 1978 and listened without moving his face much. He didn't say the word I wanted him to say. He didn't say curse or haunting. He said, "We ask for peace," and I wanted to shake him. He gave me a look that said he knew I wanted to shake him and loved me anyway. He walked out with me to Section K in the full burn of noon, and the place looked ordinary in the way a person looks ordinary when they're asleep and you forget in that moment who they can be. He prayed as if he were talking to a person in a room who might get up and leave if he tried too hard. He tipped a little water onto the ground. He closed his eyes. I watched the grass. Nothing changed. Nothing ever changed. I tried one other thing I'm embarrassed to admit. I recorded the sound with my phone at home. The app showed a waveform. When I played it back, I heard the hum of my apartment and the distant chatter of my neighbors and faint, the shape of a melody. It sounded thinner, like something had been recorded too many times on top of itself. When I scrubbed to the middle of the file, there was a new set of tones laid under the rest. 2 notes, mine. The app labeled the file automatically by the date and time. The letters in the middle spelled out purely by accident, a word I won't type here because it was a name. Not mine, not anyone I know. A clean, ordinary name. I deleted the file and then emptied the trash and then wiped the app. because I needed that to change something. It didn't. After that night with Mateo's whistle, the staff started humming a little less around the station. People chose to believe or not believe, and both choices made them work the same. No one else complained about taking the closing near Section K. Elena looked at me once like she knew some piece of this was stuck to me. She didn't ask. We have a lazy habit of giving one another privacy, where we should probably give each other questions. A week before the summer ended, a group of teenagers snuck in after sunset. We spotted them on the cameras if you want to know how this ends in the real world. They were daring one another to touch the stones, to take a photo at the wall with their faces artfully sad. One of them, a girl with a laugh like a firecracker, hummed a few bars of something poppy. The song inside the fence rose and followed her as if putting on a jacket. I found them not long after and walked them out in that patient, kind way that can sound like a joke until the humor leaves your voice. The girl kept stopping and patting her ears like she had a pearl to check. "Do you hear that?" she asked her friends. They didn't, or they said they didn't. She went home, I assume. I don't know what she hears now when her air conditioner kicks on. I'd love to tell you that someone found a plaque, that an old worker remembered a story, that a record surfaced about a choir buried under Section K in 1882. I'd love to give you a reason, because reason ends things. We didn't find one. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe the thing sings because we gave it a boundary and a letter, and tried to make sense of it all with a grid. Maybe the land makes a certain sound at certain temperatures. Maybe I brought this part on myself by answering when I should have learned to keep quiet. I finished the season. When I turned in my keys, I could still hear my 2 notes threaded through the machinery of my apartment. Long after the last close, long after the last paycheck posted, the melody lived in the small motors of my life. Some nights it's stronger, usually after days when the sky wants to rain and doesn't. Some nights it's almost gone and I think I'm free until I open the fridge and hear it hiding in the gentle shudder of the seal. I went to a friend's wedding in late August at a church nowhere near the missions. When everyone sang, I kept my mouth shut and felt like a thief. The melody in my skull bent toward the hymn, and for a breath I thought I heard other things bending too. The building, the breath of the people around me, small motors of air and light. It passed, or I told myself it passed. I clapped at the end like a normal person, and the couple smiled, and I drove home with the windows down to just have honest road noise in the car. Something that didn't pretend to be anything but what it was. You can decide how you want this to end. If you want a warning, here it is. The signs at the gate say respect the grounds, no food or drink, stay on the path. I would add one in marker if they'd let me. It would be small and plain, and I would tuck it where you might miss it, because that's how these things usually get communicated when you're lucky. It would say, don't hum in Section K. Don't answer the singing when it asks you what your voice sounds like. Walk past the wall and put your phone away and look at the stones and say in your head the names you know. And when you leave and the steel gives that little groan as the gate closes, if you think you hear something under the sound of the chain, a shape of a song that tries to be whatever you would make it, keep your mouth closed. Let it sing to itself. Let it keep whatever it's learned from me. Let me carry the rest. I'm already carrying it. I will keep carrying it as long as the refrigerator runs and the fans turn, and the city hums and the ground does whatever it does under all that stone. If you wake up one summer night and your apartment is full of a tune that isn't one, don't answer. If you have already answered, don't teach it anything else. I don't know if writing this down is going to quiet it. People say telling a thing gives it shape, and shape makes it easier to live with. The song doesn't need shape. It knows mine too well. It lives in the machines. It lives in the little currents. I'm not afraid of it the way I was. Fear is sharp. This is dull and constant and patient. Last week on my day off, I parked outside the mission just before noon when everything is honest and bright. I stood at the wall and listened. The cicadas were 1,000 small saws. The acequia glittered. No melody, no change in pressure, no trick of physics I could name. A tourist asked me where the restroom was, and I pointed and made a joke about how it's easier to ask a ranger than to follow a sign. I walked the path once, slow, and counted the steps between the gate and the place where my skin remembers the note. I didn't hum. I'll never hum there again. That's the only rule I have that feels like it might matter. When I got back to my car, I started the engine and let the air run a minute. 2 notes surfaced from the vents, then the rest, still in the tone that used to be mine before it belonged to a place. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and thought about the way Section K looks in moonlight and in noon. the same ground translating itself for different audiences. The melody turned itself down or my ears gave up trying. I pulled away and it followed me home because that's what it does now. That steady, patient thing that isn't a voice and is. If you go, and you will because human beings are built to test fences, don't answer when it asks. And if you already did, I'm sorry. It learns quick. It learns better than we do. It keeps singing after you leave. That's the part no one tells you because admitting it means you can't pretend you left it behind. I'm going to finish this and try to sleep with the fan on. Somewhere out there, a train will talk to the night and traffic will slide along 281. And 1,000 small machines will add their tiny throats to the city's choir, somewhere behind a low wall with a neat chain and a letter we use on a map. The grass will keep secrets, and if a person walks by with a song in their head, something will test that tune and store it and play it back later when the air's heavy. Don't hum. It's a simple rule. It's the best I have. If it's already too late and your fridge is singing, put your head under the water and listen to the pipes. You'll hear it there too, patient as ever, matching you, not willing to be alone. I wish I had something else to give you. All I have is that rule and the fact that I keep waking up to the same two notes, one low, then higher, and the promise that I won't add another. I didn't go to Oakwood for a thrill. I went because my friend Maya needed photos for her Halloween tour page and I owed her a favor. It was late July in Austin, one of those nights where the heat hangs around like a stubborn guest. We parked near the East Gate around 9. The bats had already left the bridges and the sky was that flat navy color you only see after a long, hot day. The city hummed a few blocks away, tires on I-35, a far siren, someone's bass line stretching over the trees. We brought a cheap tripod, a couple of lanterns, and one of those plastic water jugs that gets warm the second it leaves the cooler. Maya wore her tour guide jacket because she likes to stay in character. Her cousin Ben came too, because he's the sort of guy who doesn't say much until something is wrong. If you're not local, Oakwood is a historic cemetery on the east side. Live oaks and cedar elms, iron fences that snag your clothes. The kind of quiet that gets under your skin. There's a small Confederate section off to one side. The markers are lower there, a little more crowded, and the ground feels like it gives when you step on it, like walking on a folded quilt. We started near the front gate, taking harmless stuff. Columns in the lamplight, a dove on a headstone. Maya posed by an angel with a chipped wing and did a spooky tour guide grin. We kept our voices soft because even if you don't believe in anything, you keep your voice soft in a place like that. Around 10, a groundskeeper in a battered cap rolled past on a golf cart, gave us a look, then a shrug. "Lock up in 40, he called, and kept going. "Let's hit the Confederate section before he comes back," Maya said. We walked under a tangle of branches that made the path tunnel-like, and the air dropped a degree. There was the faint smell of creosote and something like wet pennies. Ben kept the lantern high and I set my phone to night mode. My shadow stretched long over the grass. We messed around with angles. I tried the classic silhouette against stone shot. It looked like a cutout of me pasted onto an old photograph. Not scary, not even interesting. Then Maya said, "Move a step left." And I did, and she said, "Do it again." And I did. After a minute she stilled, lips parted. "Okay," she said. "Now don't move." "What?" "Don't move," she repeated, softer. She raised the lantern a notch. "Smile." I couldn't keep still, so I laughed, and she snapped a picture anyway. The groundskeeper chugged by somewhere behind us, and I flinched at the sound. 2 minutes, he called like a countdown. We headed for the gate. It wasn't until we were in the car with the AC blasting that Maya said, "Guys." She turned her phone to show us. Ben leaned over the console. At first I didn't see it. Just me, crooked grin, shadow trailing to the left. Then my eyes adjusted to the mess of pale stone and dark grass, and I saw my shadow had a partner. There were 2 versions of me on the ground. One was mine. The other was just behind it. The shape of the head was wrong, like it was cocked to the side. And the shoulders looked too narrow. It had my outline, but loosened, like someone trying to draw me from memory. "You edited that," I said, but there was no humor in my voice. "I didn't," Maya said. "I just brightened it." Ben said nothing. He reached out and spread 2 fingers on the screen to zoom. The shadow nearest me had crisp edges from the lantern. The second one was softer. It seemed to be looking up, as if the dark spot where the face would be had lifted toward me. Ben let out a breath through his nose. "Weird," he said, the exact tone someone uses when they don't want to admit they're uncomfortable. Let me see the others, I said. We went through the set. The double shadow didn't appear near the angel with the chipped wing, or the front gate, or the obelisk by the big oak. It only showed up in the Confederate section, not in every photo either, just the last few, as if it had been practicing. The next morning I chalked it up to the lantern angle and moved on. I worked nights digitizing microfilm at the UT library. It's mostly me and the hum of old machines, and when you step out into the hall you can hear a custodial cruise radio and the soft squeak of a cart. I kept thinking about the second shadow, how it was wrong in ways you feel before you can name. After an hour of trying not to think about it, I took a break and texted Maya. She sent me a dozen skull emojis and posted, "It's good for engagement." I put my phone face down. At around 3 in the morning, I went to the vending machines. The hall there has one high window that lets in the orange glow from the parking lot. I put cash in for a bottle of water and watched my shadow fall across the floor. It stretched to the left, sharp and ordinary. Nothing behind it. I exhaled and tried to laugh at myself for being jumpy. That was when a figure passed outside, and for a split second the light shifted and my shadow split. The main one kept still. The second one lifted its head a fraction of a second before I did. The breath missed my next step. I dropped the bottle. The echo sounded like someone clapping once in an empty auditorium. The figure outside was just a grad student walking to his car, head down, backpack on. I stood very still until my heart stopped trying to outrun itself. I told myself I'd imagined the movement, that my own flinch made a weird angle with the light. I told myself lots of things. I didn't finish any of them. The next time it came up, it was even easier to explain away. I was in the shower at my apartment in Hyde Park, steam turning the tiles gray. The bathroom light is terrible, one bare bulb. I turned my head to rinse the shampoo, and in the blurred glass I saw two forms. Mine, and slightly behind it another with the head tilted like a curious dog. I turned hard enough to bang my elbow, threw open the shower door and stared at the fogged mirror. Just me, water running, the bulb twitching. I didn't call Maya that day because I didn't want to give the thing voice. That sounds dramatic, but I think you'll know what I mean. Once you start telling someone about a fear, you become a little more owned by it. That afternoon, a flyer appeared in my building's lobby for a historical lecture about Old Austin. Someone had taped it crooked, and a line at the bottom read, "We'll include a short talk on Oakwood and the Civil War." I tore it down without thinking and stuffed it in my pocket. It felt like I'd seen my name written somewhere. I didn't remember writing it. When I finally texted, it was short. "Let's go back," I wrote. Maya sent 3 question marks. Ben sent nothing. Then 5 minutes later, "Tonight or tomorrow?" "Tonight," I said before I could rationalize myself out of it. We went at dusk this time. The sky over East Austin had that gold-brown haze you get when the day has been long and the wind still. The same groundskeeper, or another one in the same hat, gave us a tighter look at the gate. "Don't wander," he said. "Close at 9 sharp." "We won't," Maya said with her brightest tour voice. We didn't play around with wide shots. We went straight back. The Confederate section felt quieter than the rest. No birdsong. The air smelled like dust and hot grass. Ben held the lantern again, but this time he kept moving it so the shadows slid across the stones in a slow, searching way. I stood where I'd stood before, and Maya took burst photos. In the first few, my shadow was alone. In the fourth, another shape appeared behind mine, a black smudge testing the edges of a human outline. We tried to be smart. "It's the lantern angle," Ben said. He placed it directly at my feet so both shadows would be dead on. "See?" He lifted it again. "Wait." He set it down, then up. The second shadow moved with the same delay as before, like it had to think each time. A wind walked through the cedars, the kind that doesn't touch your body but touches something attached to it. I felt a pressure near my shoulder. Not painful, just present. I looked down at the ground and saw my shadow tilt its head, and behind it, the other shadow tilting first. Maya spoke without looking up from her phone. "What if we trace it?" "With chalk?" Ben said, already reaching for the piece she kept in her bag for marking tour spots. They drew around my feet. Then they traced the outline of my shadow on the grass and dirt, laughing at themselves for playing a children's game in a graveyard, laughing because you have to let the sound out somehow. Then they stepped back. "Don't move," Maya said. I didn't. The second shadow didn't. It hovered just outside the chalk line, head off kilter, as if it were waiting for permission. "That's enough." Ben said. I'm not loving this. The groundskeeper's cart buzzed faintly somewhere near the front. A jogger passed outside the fence, oblivious, white earbuds bright in the dim. Maya took one last shot and then reached for my arm. That was when the second shadow stepped forward. I swear to you I didn't. It didn't lunge or glide or do anything you'd call cinematic. It took a careful, curious half-step that brought its head onto the chalk line where mine was supposed to be. I felt a temperature change along my neck, the exact outline of someone's attention. It wasn't a hand, more like the cold you feel when you open a freezer and stand too close. The second shadow tilted its head, slowly aligning with mine, trying to reconcile its shape with my shape like it wanted to fit. I took a step back. It moved a fraction of a second before I did, which hurt my brain in a tiny way I can't explain, like hearing a note that's a hair off. Stop, Ben said louder. We're done. I turned to go. Maya took one last photo over her shoulder because that's who she is. She flinched. The cart buzzed closer. We left the chalk on the ground like a chalk outline in a place that already had too many outlines. On the way to the car, Maya scrolled with quick fingers. It's clearer this time, she said. Her voice was hushed. It's looking at you. I didn't ask to see. I suddenly wanted very much to be stupid. But I saw anyway because she held the phone up. The second shadow was no longer a smudge. It had my head shape now nearly right. The neck, too. The shoulders were still off, too high, like it had been put together from incomplete notes. If you looked too long, it started to look like it was turned toward the camera, not the light. Like it was watching Maya while it learned me. We didn't talk for a day or two. Sometimes you need to walk around your life pretending its corners are still square. I went to work. I avoided reflective surfaces. I did laundry with the apartment lights all on. At 3 a.m. at the vending machines, my shadow was alone. At home in the bathroom, my reflection was tired but mine. Then Ben called. He never calls. You have to come over, he said. His voice had dirt in it. He lived off Manor basement apartment, the kind of place where the hallway smells like other people's cooking. He'd set up his phone on the table with the Confederate photos open. He didn't say hello. Look at this. He flicked through. In the last one, the second shadow had moved again. It looked almost perfectly like me. It had lost the strange narrowness. The tilt of the head matched the way I tilt when I'm trying to read something too close, but it wasn't behind me anymore. It was off to the side. The little angle of its head was not lined up with mine. It was angled toward Ben. I didn't do anything. He said, palms out. Okay, I said, because there was nothing else to say. He rubbed his arms. Since that night, my lamp throws 2 shadows. Not always, just sometimes. It's like a coin flip. One of them moves a hair earlier than the other. If I turn my head fast, I can catch the wrong one settling, and when I look right at it, it behaves. It was quiet enough to hear the upstairs neighbor's dishwasher kick on. The sound felt too domestic for the way my skin was behaving. Maya, I said. She texted me that her phone keeps making live photos in the gallery even when she swears she turned that off. When she holds down the image, he paused. The second shadow's head turns. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on and watched the wall. In the early morning, as the outside sky turned from navy to the color of paper, my lamp cast a shadow of me on the wall by the bookshelf. I lifted my hand. The shadow lifted a beat after me. Then there was a second shadow that lifted first, as if we were 3 people taking turns being in charge of the same body. It is hard to explain how you can feel watched by something that is technically the absence of light. I don't mean watched in the paranoid way. I mean watched like a friend studies your face when they're trying to remember which version of you they're talking to. It felt patient, something piecing together my face from moments. When I exhaled, my shadow's chest fell. The second one fell a hair earlier. I said my name out loud to the empty room, and both shadows stilled as if they were listening. You'll wonder why I didn't leave. Go stay with Maya, take a trip, burn sage, move apartments. I can answer some of that. Moving feels performative when the other thing lives in your outline. Hotels have lamps. Stairs at your parents' house throw shadows too. A new place would only add new surfaces for it to practice on. I went back one more time. I didn't tell anyone I was going. The sky was white with heat haze even at dusk. A group of tourists drifted by the main gate. A kid on a bike rattled past. I walked straight to the Confederate section past a sign that asked visitors to be respectful. The chalk from that night had been washed away by a sprinkler or wind. I stood where I had stood and didn't turn on a light. Stillness has a weight, and that patch of ground was heavy with it. My shadow lay dim and short near my feet. There was nothing behind it. "Okay," I said, alone. "You win. You know me." The wind lifted in the live oaks, not enough to move my hair, enough to make the leaves talk to each other. A moving cloud made the light change, and my shadow split and rejoined. I had the sense that whatever it was had chosen a different approach. I left. For a week, nothing happened dramatically. Just the small wrongnesses that you dismiss because your life has to keep going. In the window of the coffee shop on Red River, my reflection hesitated when I didn't. On my computer screen, the camera picked up a faint flicker over my shoulder when the room was still. Maya texted a photo from her hallway where there were 3 shadows, hers and 2 others. One turned toward her, one turned toward the stairs. Then a man I didn't know stopped me on the sidewalk. He had a tattoo of a bluebonnet on his forearm and kind eyes. "This is going to sound insane," he said, "but I follow Maya's tour page. That photo, the one with the double shadow, I swear I see 2 of you in the reflection on the stone. One's a little earlier than the other." He smiled like he was apologizing for himself. "You should take it down." "It's good for engagement," I said, and my voice sounded like someone else's voice. That night, I sat on my couch with the lamp off and the TV on a blank input so the screen was a black mirror. I watched myself in it the way I sit when I think nobody is looking. One knee up, shoulders forward, hand curled against my mouth. On the wall beside the TV, my shadow stretched and shifted with the light from the window. Another shadow sat beside it that wasn't mine, already at rest in the posture I would take a second later. It tilted its head, more certain now, as if a student had studied long enough to stop guessing. I am not going to tell you that anything reached out of a wall. Nobody died. There was no screaming or blood or anything that would ruin your sleep in an obvious way. The worst thing it did was begin to show up in places I thought were mine alone. In a picture frame in my mother's house where the glass reflected a Sunday lunch. In a puddle by the curb where a thunderstorm left water cupped on the street. In the corner of my eye when I turned a page, I stopped going to Oakwood. Maya moved her tour to a different route. Ben got a job in San Marcos and swears the shadows there behave. The groundskeeper, Mr. Alvarez, I learned later, retired. When I see him at HEB, he nods like we share a memory we decided not to repeat out loud. Here is what I know. When you stand in the Confederate section at Oakwood near the end of a hot day, the light does something particular as it flattens. Shadows get long and thin. The place is full of edges and angles and stone cooled unevenly by time. If something were going to try to learn you from your outline, it would pick a spot like that. It would watch you tilt your head and try the gesture, and at first it would get it wrong and then a little less wrong and finally almost right. It would stare like it was trying to remember your face so it could recognize you later in different light. If you go, and I know some of you will because that's human nature, don't turn your lantern on right away. Don't stand where the ground feels like a quilt and laugh while you make art from old names. If you see your shadow tilt before your head moves, if you see any hint of another shape testing your outline, leave. Don't wait to be brave. Don't let it finish learning. Because once it remembers you, it's better at finding you than you are at forgetting it. Last week I printed a photo at the drugstore because my mother still keeps a real album. I chose one from a barbecue in the backyard. The line printed too dark and I was going to toss it, but something made me look closer. There I was, arms up, laughing. There was my shadow on the fence, and a second shadow an arm's length away, head tilted, already settling into the laugh that hadn't arrived in me yet. I held the paper and felt the cheap photo stock warm in my hand. When I lifted my head, the shape on my wall lifted first, just a fraction, as if reminding me of our order. If you scroll back far enough on Maya's page, you can still find the double shadow shot. She meant to take it down, but the algorithm likes it, so it keeps showing up again after she hides it. People comment saying it's a trick of the light, that there's a second lantern out of frame, that it's edited for clicks. A few say nothing, just post the same emoji over and over, the one with the head tilted to the side. When I catch myself reading the thread, I lock my phone and put it face down and sit very still. Across the room beside the lamp that makes the cheap shade glow, my shadow waits on the wall in the posture I think I'm not going to take. The other one waits too, just ahead of me, patient, already remembering. I took the seasonal grounds job at the city cemetery in Huntsville because I needed something quiet after a messy year. People in town just call it Evergreen, though the sign out front says Evergreen Cemetery and the City Parks Department handles it. It sits on a shallow rise with pecan trees, a ring of chain-link fence, and a caretaker's shed that looks newer than everything around it. If you're driving in on 45, you can see the Sam Houston statue if you look the right way. But from inside the cemetery, you mostly see trees and white stones and the sky. It felt like a place where nothing much would happen, which was exactly why I took it. The caretaker, a man named Ray Garner, had been there long enough that people said his hair turned gray on that lawnmower. He had the way of a person who knew every bolt in his shed and could find a missing nut by sound. My first day, he handed me a string line reel and a box of orange landscape flags and pointed to the north corner by the pecans. "Show you something odd?" he said. We walked out past the older parts of the cemetery where the stones are thin and lean a little, past a row of boxwoods to a shallow dip where a line of small fieldstones sat low in the grass. No names on them. Just flat, rounded rocks, each one about the size of a shoebox lid. They were set in a straight line. The caretaker's shed sat 50 or 60 feet away. A cinder block box with a single window and a roll-up door. New gutters, fresh concrete pad. The fieldstones looked like they'd been there much longer than the shed. "We call it the unmarked row," Ray said. "It's been here as long as anybody remembers. Some people say they're footstones for a pauper's section. Others say they're prisoner graves. Nobody's got a list. City records from way back are a mess." "Why show me?" I asked. He crouched, thumbed a line in the dirt along the stones, then stood and squinted at the shed. "Because they move," he said. "By inches. Always toward the shed. I set them back twice a week. I make you show me you can set a string line straight. And I make you promise not to tell me I'm crazy until you've seen it for yourself." It sounded like the sort of hazing joke you play on the new guy. But it was my first day and I wanted the hours, so I kept my mouth shut. We set the string line tight between two rebar stakes and used a tape measure and my boot heel to line up each stone, bumping them flush to the string until they sat like teeth in a jaw. The dirt under them was damp and cool. We chalked the ground behind each one, a little white dash to mark where it started. Ray took a photo on his phone and showed me the frame. The pink string dead straight, the chalk marks neat and clean. "Come back Thursday," he said. "We'll do it again." The shed was my home base. It smelled like gasoline and cut grass and cold metal. There was a radio that only played static until it found a country station. A dented thermos on a shelf had R. Garner scratched into the steel. Another groundskeeper named Teresa came on Wednesdays and Saturdays. She was mid-30s, tough, and kept her hair under a ball cap. She could edge a border like she was writing calligraphy. It was the kind of job where you talk about small things and where everybody's secrets stay private. People came in to bury the dead and we kept the place presentable. That was the deal. By Thursday afternoon, a drift of chinaberry leaves had pooled against the chain link. The sun fell hard on the shed roof, and the grass was dry enough that trimmer line made a hiss. I walked back out to the unmarked row expecting to find everything just as we left it, because rocks don't move and nobody had any reason to mess with them. They weren't where we left them, not by feet, by inches. Each stone, all the way down, had a thumb's width of dirt showing between the chalk dash and the back edge, and the front of each stone had shaved a raw line in the turf. The line was still straight, but the whole thing had slid all of it toward the shed. I stood there, hands on my belt, trying to find the words. I checked the photos on my phone and on Ray's because I wanted to be sure the chalk dashes weren't a trick of light. They weren't. I wiped my thumb over one and left a smear. The cut line in the turf was fresh, like the stones had done it that morning. "So," Ray said, "you believe me now, we reset them." We pulled the string tight again and bumped each stone back. We measured with a little contractor's level. The bubble centered. We set new chalk. Ray took another photo. When we were done, I could feel the tightness in my shoulders like I'd been bracing without knowing it. "Could be ground heaves," I said, because I needed it to be something. "Could be," he said, "but then why just this row? And why this way?" That became our routine. We mowed, we edged, we filled sunken spots with soil and seed, we trimmed branches, we picked up old flowers. We kept an eye on that row, and every 3 or 4 days, sometimes 5, those stones had inched toward the shed, sometimes just a finger's width, once almost 2 inches in a weekend. We never caught anyone near them. No boot marks, no tire tracks. We talked about raccoons or feral hogs until we realized we were only saying words. Teresa asked where I kept disappearing on Thursdays, and I told her. She rolled her eyes, then came with us, then put her hands on her hips and said, "Nope," like she was scolding a toddler. After that, she reset them with us. She also tied a tiny jingle bell on a fishing line and staked it across the front of the stones one afternoon when we left. It was silly and it made us feel better. The bell was still tied the next morning. The line hung slack and the stones were 2 inches closer to the shed. We bought a cheap game camera and set it facing the row. The next day, it had a full battery and an empty memory card. After that, the camera was turned sideways like somebody put their hand on it and twisted it to look at the pecan tree instead. Ray locked the pad on the camera. He found it still locked and still facing the pecan tree. He made a joke that at least whatever it was had a sense of modesty. Small things started to go wrong in and around the shed. The broom fell twice in one morning and nobody had touched it. The tape measure we kept on the bench unspooled itself on the concrete and lay there like a silver snake, the red end hooked on nothing. The radio picked up a weather alert in the middle of a clear, still day and then went back to static. We chalked it up to drafts, to a bad outlet, to the train on the far side of downtown making a tiny tremor. It helped to have reasons. On the second Friday, I stayed late to lock the gate after a sunset service. Teresa went home early to get her kids. Ray was counting trimmer spools and fuel cans in the shed. The siren from one of the prison units carried over on the wind the way it does sometimes. A long, ghostly sound that I've heard since I was a kid, and that still makes the hair on my arms stand up. The light went flatter, gold fading to gray. I swung the gate closed and snapped the lock, and on the way back I heard tapping. It was a dry, hollow tap, like a knuckle on a tabletop. 3 beats and a pause, then 3 beats again. It wasn't wind knocking a branch into the shed. It wasn't the gutter. It was below me. I looked down and felt the concrete slab under my boots vibrate on the third tap. Ray came out of the shed with his thermos, heard the end of it and looked at me. "Say it," he said. "I heard knocking," I said, and felt stupid. "From below," he said. I nodded. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "I've heard that 5 times this year," he said. "Always when the row gets close to the door. I'll show you something." He knelt at the corner where the slab met the cinder block wall and ran his finger along the joint. The concrete there was hairline cracked, and the crack ran straight under the threshold, a pencil line aimed at the unmarked row like a laser pointer. "Concrete shrinks," he said. "That's what the city guy told me. He also told me not to call him about rocks. The city guy was Mr. Alvarez, our park supervisor. He came out on a Monday after we'd sent him photos and a short note about shifting stones and hairline cracks and bells that didn't ring. He walked the row, bent down, touched the chalk on his finger, frowned at the way the whole line sat closer to the shed than it had in May. He said words like expansion and contraction and soil creep, and then he added that as long as the row was safe and not tripping visitors or blocking access, it wasn't a priority. He offered to pour a curb if it made us feel better. Ray told him thank you and didn't say what was on his mind, which was that if you poured a curb here, you might be pouring it over more than dirt. 2 days later, Teresa found an old ledger in a metal cabinet at the back of the shed. We were cleaning, trying to make space for a new edger, and she hauled it out from behind a coil of old hose. The book had been wet at some point and dried wavy. Inside were names, dates, and little notes. Not a lot. It wasn't official, more like a caretaker's personal notebook. The back pages had brief entries from the early 80s in a careful hand, which stopped suddenly with this sentence: "Board decided to rebuild shed over old slab. Moved footstones to fence line until pourback cured. Return them by Friday." That last instruction was underlined twice. There was no checkmark. There were no more entries after it. Teresa looked up, one eyebrow high. "So," she said, "we built this shed on top of where the old one was, and somebody moved stones to the fence and was supposed to put them back. Did they put them back in the wrong place?" Ray had his hands on his belt, eyes on the floor. I watched him think. He reached for the book, then stopped and didn't touch it. "The guy before me," he said. "He had an accident. Not here, he was a good man. He told me some things that first spring, then he stopped telling. He said never to mess with that row any more than to line it straight because there were questions about where they belonged." I thought he meant questions like nobody wrote down a map. Maybe he meant questions like someone put them wrong and never fixed it and then retired and didn't hand the problem down right. We shut the book and put it back in the cabinet because it felt like we'd opened somebody else's drawer. That night I dreamed I was standing where the row was and the shed door was open. and there was a long dirt aisle between me and the dark inside, and someone was walking up it slow. I woke up with my hand clenched like I'd been holding a string. A week later, after dealing with ant beds around a family plot and a mower with a belt that squealed, the unmarked row was the closest it had ever been to the shed. The front stone was less than 4 feet from the threshold. I could measure it with my stride. Teresa stood with her hands on her hips. Ray let out a breath and said, "We're staying tonight." We didn't make a production out of it. We told Alvarez we were doing a late cleanup and a tool inventory. Ray brought a battery lantern, extra coffee, and 3 folding chairs. Teresa brought a bag of tamales wrapped in foil and a roll of painter's tape. I brought another game camera and a little digital recorder I used for notes sometimes. We strung the string line again and set the stones dead straight. Then we tied a thin cord from the front stone to the shed's doorknob, just slack enough that if the stone moved, the knob would turn. Teresa put painter's tape across the threshold at floor level in 3 strips, just as a tell. We set the game camera on the workbench inside the window looking out. We turned on the recorder and set it on the bench too. We didn't tell anyone in case it turned out to be boring and we'd have to explain why we spent a Friday night with lawn equipment. Evergreen is quiet after dark in a way that isn't like anything else. It's not the same quiet as a living room or a street or a pasture. It has weight. The pecans clicked in a breeze that hadn't existed when the sun was up, and the humidity climbed out of the ground. Somewhere a dog barked far away. The city's low hum was just present enough to keep it from feeling like you'd stepped out of the world. We kept the shed lights off so the window wouldn't reflect us and so we'd be able to see out. At 9, the radio found a station and played hymns. At 10, it was static. At 11, the prison siren carried, low and long. Just before midnight, the painter's tape along the threshold wrinkled. Not all at once. 1 strip folded, a little buckle, then settled. We went quiet all at once, like we'd agreed to it in advance. The knob didn't turn. The cord hung limp. The string line, visible in the lantern's spill through the window, was still taut and neat along the row. We watched and drank coffee and tried to pretend we were having a normal conversation about mowing, patterns. A little after 2 in the morning, the digital recorder picked up a sound I can still hear in my head on nights when I can't sleep. It was a tiny metallic click like a spoon set down, then a light scrape like grit under a shoe, then the 3 hollow taps from under the slab, spaced like a patient person knocking. The doorknob turned. We didn't see it turn. We heard it and felt the latch bump against the strike. Teresa hissed, "Nope," under her breath with the same flat tone she used on the row. The cord between the knob and the front stone didn't pull. It went slack, as if it were being fed toward the stone instead of pulled away. I reached for the door and pushed it open, and it stopped dead on something solid. A solid I knew wasn't there a heartbeat before. We leaned into it together and the door didn't give. The opening was 3 fingers wide and smelled like damp soil. I bent, peered out through the inch of night, and saw the edge of the front stone pressed against the threshold. The painter's tape had folded under it. The stone itself had come to meet the door. Behind it, the next stone had turned on a diagonal. The one after that had lifted its front edge out of the ground a fraction, like a person getting up out of a chair. "Someone's outside," I said, though I didn't believe it, and I moved to the window and looked out. The row was not a row anymore. It was the beginning of a path. The stones had slid and tilted in a zipper pattern, each one angled, each one aiming at the door. There were no footprints in the dew. There was no one to see. I said Teresa's name and she said mine, and we didn't say anything else for a second, because words would have made it too real. The tapping under the slab came again, softer now, almost like it was on the other side of the concrete rather than under it. The way a sound changes when a door sits between you and the person making it. Ray put his forehead on the jamb and whispered something I couldn't catch. "What?" Teresa said. He straightened, blinking like he was coming up from water. "I should have told you," he said. "When I started here, there was a crosshatch of stakes back behind the shed. The man who trained me said they were marking something until a pour cured. Called them footstones. Said they were moving them back one by one as they straightened the fence line. He got sick. The city poured the slab while he was in the hospital. I told the board he'd said to put them back. They said the map was bad. They said nobody could agree where back was." He swallowed. He looked at the crack in the slab like it had said his name. "I lined that row every week for 20 years, he said. I think they're pointing at what we paved over. He said it softly, and the word we made my stomach feel wrong. I had never poured a foundation or decided where one should go. I had spread gravel. I had stacked trimmer line. But I was standing inside that shed on that floor with my boots on that concrete, and the idea that the mistake wasn't just old, but was ours right now, made the hair on my arms lift. We should have left. We should have called Alvarez and told him to bring people with better maps and shovels. We should have climbed out the window and gone home. Instead, we tried something dumb and simple because we were tired and we wanted this to stop. We went out the window. Ray eased it open and slid over the bench and belly crawled under the sash, and I passed him the lantern. Teresa went second. I went last and felt the sill scrape my belt. Outside, the air felt like a warm cloth. The stones were damp and cool. When we tried to push the front stone back a few inches to clear the door, it felt heavier than before. More like we were pushing into the ground itself than pushing a rock across grass. We got it to move half an inch. It slid back another half an inch the moment we took our hands off, as if the earth had a memory and wanted to put things where it thought they should be. A mist came in low, a yard-high strip of it that traveled across the grass like a slow river. The lantern halo made it a white wall. The path the stones made into that wall glowed like a track. Behind us, from inside the shed, we heard the metallic click again. Not the radio, not the thermos. The chalkline reel on the bench spun. We could see its silhouette in the window, the little plastic spool whirring like someone was pulling the string hard. A bright line of chalk snapped against the glass once, twice, and left a pale star where there had been nothing. The tapping under the slab came one more time and then moved. It moved right toward the doorway and stopped. There were no voices. There was no shape in the mist. There was just the absolute sense that we were standing between two things that wanted to be in the same place, and that we were the mistake. We stood there long enough for my legs to ache. The mist thinned. The stones didn't move again while we watched. We circled around the back of the shed and went in through the window rather than fight the door. We shut off the recorder. We sat until the first weak light came through the pecans. When we finally pushed the door open, it scraped across stone with a sound that felt like it was going to live in my jaw forever. Teresa didn't say a word. She took the ledger out of the cabinet and put it in a plastic bag. Ray called Alvarez at 8 on the dot and said the slab had cracked and we needed to talk. The city didn't send a backhoe. They sent a crew to pour a 4-inch curb along the front of the door to protect the foundation from water intrusion. Alvarez said it was a good idea and that the curb would stop soil movement. He said there was no budget for exhumations or archaeology or lawyers. He's not a bad man. He is a person who works inside a system that puts caution tape around questions and takes them down for homecoming. We reset the row to the string line one more time and the crew poured the curb and smoothed it like a man icing a cake. The next morning, the curb had a hairline crack under the knob. The painter's tape we had left under the threshold had pushed a wrinkle into the fresh concrete. A tiny buckle you had to kneel to see. I didn't tell Alvarez. I put the tape in my pocket and took it home and threw it away and then regretted that I didn't keep it, as if it were something like evidence. I lasted another week. It wasn't any one thing. It was all of it together. The row came right back to the curb and stopped there. The tapping changed to a faint vibration you felt more than heard when you stood in the doorway. The radio in the shed tuned itself to an AM station that seemed to list names and numbers in a flat voice around 2 in the morning, and then was static when we tried to record it. I started waking up at 3:18 on the dot and sitting at my kitchen table until 4 for no good reason. When Teresa told me she wouldn't go in the shed alone, I knew I was done. On my last day, I cleaned the trimmer and changed the oil in the mower and rolled the reels of string line until they were tight and neat. I stood across from the unmarked row and tried to decide if I was going to be the guy who made a speech to nobody. I didn't. I pressed my hand on the front stone. It was warm in the sun. It felt like all the other stones in the whole place, and that was maybe the worst part. That was in June. In August, I went back to leave flowers on a plot for a friend's mother. The grass was brittle from heat. The sky had that hard white look it gets here. I walked over to the shed like a person who tells himself he's not going to look and then looks anyway. The row sits right up against the curb now. Ray retired. A younger guy named Ben was wiping down the mower and said the usual, "You hear the stories," with a grin that shows someone gave him the script. When he opened the door for me to borrow a rake, the bottom of it rasped across stone. He winced. I pretended not to notice. The ledger was gone. The radio was gone. The chalk reel was neatly wound and hung on a nail, and the string inside was blue now instead of red. Someone had epoxied the hairline crack. From the window, if you looked straight down, you could see the top edges of 2 stones like toes pressed against a line. On my way out, I counted the field stones because I had never counted them, and because my brain needed a simple dumb task, counting the unmarked, somehow thinking that the number mattered. There were 21. When I reached the gate, I stopped and turned and counted again, because in my head there had been 1 fewer when I started in May. I couldn't swear to it, and that uncertainty felt like a trick. That night at home, I tried to draw the row from memory on a paper towel and realized I couldn't put shapes to the thing that scared me. I still have the key to the shed on my ring, though it isn't mine to keep. It's got a round aluminum tag marked S3. Sometimes it taps against my steering column while I drive. 3 quick knocks that are probably just road chatter and the weight of other keys in the way I worry. I threw out my old steel-toed boots because they kept leaving a faint red dust on my floor mat that I couldn't place at first and then could. I put the boots in the collected trash at the curb on a Thursday, and when I walked back up my driveway, I knew I was being ridiculous, and every hair on my arm stood up anyway. If you go to Evergreen on a hot day, you'll see a quiet place. You'll see pecans and grass, and you'll hear the city at a distance and the hum of the insects. If you walk to the north corner, you'll see a row of stones that don't say anything. You'll see a shed like a blockhouse that could be anywhere. You won't see a mystery. You won't hear knocking. I tell myself the row is just a line of rocks doing what rocks do in a place where ground moves and people misremember things. I tell myself all we did was notice something we had no business noticing. What I don't tell myself, except at 3:18 when I'm sitting at my kitchen table, is that it feels less like those stones are trying to get in and more like they're trying to point. Not at a place. At a person. The cord we tied that night is still somewhere in the shed. The painter's tape is gone. The ledger is probably in a drawer at City Hall. None of that matters to the only part I can't shake, which is how the door pressed back on us like a palm on the other side, and how, when the mist came, the path the stones made looked soft and clear and perfectly straight. Last week, I parked on Avenue M to avoid traffic and sat there watching heat move over the road. I could smell cut grass from somewhere. The key on my ring tapped once against the wheel, then twice, then was still. It made me think of a thing Ray said on my second day. Something I had forgotten until it arrived all at once like a train. He said, "What a cemetery knows and what a city lets you say are 2 different things." I think something under that concrete knows its name. I think it's patient. I think it will wait there, behind a door we made, until someone listens harder than we did. I hope that person isn't me. I hope when they open the door, there's nothing there but old air and old soil and the way a place exhales when you finally get it right. And yet I can feel the press of the slab through my boots some nights, even here at home, and I hear 3 soft knocks from under a floor that has nothing under it but joists and spiders, and the cold kind of quiet you get when you've carried a key too long. I'm writing this because I still hear it when the weather turns wrong for West Texas, when a warm day drops into a cold night, and the fields sweat out a low white blanket that slides across the prairie. Lubbock isn't a fog town. We get dust, wind that knocks you sideways, sunsets that look like a furnace door opening. But some nights you can't see the grain elevators across the highway, and the streetlights float like beads on a string, and sound carries in a way that makes distance feel slippery. That's when the whistling starts up at Lubbock Prairie Cemetery, and if you follow it, it'll walk you in a slow, patient circle until you wind up at the same grave every single time. 1971 on the stone. A caretaker with his iron keys in his hands. I picked up the evening ground shift because it paid better than stocking, and it didn't involve customers. My cousin Eli used to mow the city medians in summer, and said the cemetery work was easy once you got used to the quiet. He was right about the quiet, but not the easy. Lubbock Prairie sits on a long, flat rise west of town, where the wind never seems to settle. The entrance is a pair of black iron gates with a latch you could bruise your palm on, and a little cream-painted caretaker's office that smells like pine sol, old paper, and dirt. The city calls the guy at night security, but it's really just one of us rotating through. Lock the main gate at dusk. Walk the fence, flip a few light timers, make sure nobody's sleeping where they shouldn't. We're supposed to call in anything weird. But weird is a sliding scale in a place where grief shows up in all kinds of outfits. First week, I got trained by Mr. Rojas. He's one of those men you can't age by their face. Could be 50, could be 70. He worked the cemetery when it was out by cotton fields instead of subdivisions. He didn't talk much until we were halfway through the fence line, and the wind had stopped for once. And then he pointed with his chin to the far corner where the old stones leaned like teeth. "You hear a tune out here? You don't follow it outside the fence," he said. "Inside is one thing. Outside is how folks get hurt." I thought he was warning me about drunks messing around, so I nodded. "Anybody ever jump you for real?" "It won't jump you," he said. "It'll get you to jump yourself." He didn't explain. He lifted the heavy chain at the maintenance gate and let it fall with a clank that went out across the rows. Later, back in the office, he wrote the codes on an index card for me and pinned the card to the corkboard with a rusty nail. "Don't take that card home," he said. "If you need to whistle, don't. If something whistles at you, don't answer." When Mr. Rojas closed the door behind him, I laughed because superstition looks funny under fluorescent lights. I stopped laughing the first time the fog came. It was a Saturday in late October, warm at noon, jacket cold by 6. Eli and our friend Mara drove out to keep me company and to take some moody photos for her class. Mara shoots everything like the world is a memory already. Gas stations at twilight, dead cotton plants against a storm sky, ghost signs on brick walls that say, "Feed" in letters you can read from a mile away. She floated between the stones with her camera to her eye. The strap looped so many times around her wrist it looked like a tourniquet. Eli carried a Whataburger cup and told stories about a guy from his high school who played taps at funerals and then got recruited to a metal band because everybody said he looked intense. We were leaning against the maintenance shed when a white line stitched itself along the ground by the fence. Fog rolled the way water does when it's pulled by gravity. I've seen fog before, everywhere does eventually, but there was something about this that looked purposeful, like it was finding the low places and filling them up on purpose. We could still see the town's orange glow at the horizon, but here the light thinned and smudged until the graves turned into shapes, and the shapes turned into suggestions. "That's pretty," Mara said. She lifted her camera and fired off 3 quick shots. Eli made a joke about haunted Instagram. Then, from somewhere out in the rows, a whistle rose and fell. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even spooky, not the way people think of spooky with echo and minor keys. It was a simple pattern. 3 notes stepping up, 1 sliding down, then a pause like someone catching their breath. The kind of thing you might hum without thinking while you swept a floor. I was halfway smiling because the world feels less lonely when you hear another human sound. The cemetery was empty as far as we knew. Correct number of cars in the lot, no funerals, no stray teenagers. But there it was again. 3 up, 1 down. Pause. Eli's face went sideways the way it does when he's trying to place a song. "What is that? That like a lullaby?" Mara was already walking toward it, camera at her chest. "Let's go." "Hey," I said, and I meant to joke, but what came out was too flat to be funny. "Stay inside the fence." We didn't talk while we followed the whistle. It moved in the way sound moves in fog. Close, then far, then behind you, then secret and small like it's 2 rows over and covering its mouth with its hand. We took the gravel path past the new section with the granite like polished night, into the old part where the stones are chalky and the names have turned to the color of rain. The whistling didn't hurry. If anything, it slowed down when we did. Mara pointed. "Over there." We drifted that way and the fog got thicker, then thinner like it was breathing us in and out. I wanted to call a real person's name. Someone who could say, "Hey, sorry, didn't mean to scare you." I didn't want to whistle back. We slipped between 2 cedars and came into a small square plot with a low chain around it. 4 posts. Chain looped like a necklace, a stone the size of a suitcase, and a metal plaque inset in concrete that said, "Prairie Caretaker" in stamped letters. The name above it read Eldon Price, 1911-1971. Someone had set a pair of rusted keys on the base and wired them down. The wiring had an old look, like coat hanger straightened and wrapped, then painted over, then repainted many times. The whistle stopped. We stood there listening to the quiet feel loud. A few drops from the cedars clicked onto the chain. The keys were the size of my palm, old-fashioned and simple, the kind you see in school books about jailers. I didn't touch them. Eli leaned in and squinted. "They buried this guy with his keys?" "That's the story," I said, not realizing I knew it until I said it. "He died doing his rounds in a fog and the town said bury him with what he carried, so he could rest. Mara took a picture. The flash was off, but the lens made a soft tick that felt rude. You believe that? I didn't answer because the whistle began again behind us now, moving away at a walking speed. We followed it for 20 minutes without meaning to. It never broke pattern. We made a long, slow loop and ended up right back at Eldon Price. That should have been enough for one night. It wasn't. I had to lock up. Eli and Mara left when the fog thinned toward the highway and the night got the kind of cold that feels damp. I walked the perimeter with my flashlight pointed low, because your brain plays fewer tricks if you can see your boots. Every few rows I clicked off my light to look at the dark like I could catch it moving. Twice I heard the tune far away, soft as breath. I didn't follow it. When I reached the front, I put the chain through, clicked the lock, tugged twice. It held. Back in the office, I checked the usual and wrote in the log like Rojas showed me. The pen scraped loud. When I looked up at the little window, there was nothing but my face and a smear of condensation. I blew on the glass and wiped it with my sleeve. When I put the pen down, it clinked against metal. A key lay by my hand. Not the city padlock key, not any key I carried. It was iron, heavy, with a bit worn shiny and a ring polished by 1,000 turns. The office door was shut. The desk drawers were shut. I sat very still and listened to the building listen back. I won't pretend I was brave. I put the key in the drawer and shut it and dug out my phone to call Rojas. He answered on the second ring like he'd been awake already. I told him what I'd heard, which was the truth with some smoothness sanded off. Then I told him about the key. He didn't speak for a few seconds. Put it back on the grave, he said. His voice was careful, like stepping onto ice. If you can do it now, do it now. If not, first thing tomorrow. Don't carry it around. Don't take it home. I looked at the fog boiling along the ground outside the window. You're telling me to walk a key out there at midnight, while the soundtrack from a 19th century jail plays somewhere by the fence. I'm telling you, don't make him go looking for it, Rojas said. He wasn't mean. He was exact. That's worse at night. I waited for him to laugh or to say he was messing with me. He didn't. I didn't go back out that night. I locked the drawer. I told myself it would be funny in the morning. I took the city truck home with my shoulders up around my ears. When I pulled up to my apartment, the mist hung in the parking lot lights like something was cooking. I kept hearing 3 notes up, 1 down, but that could have been nerves, could have been the way my heartbeat sounded in my ear. I didn't sleep long. At 3:14, I woke because somebody was whistling in the hall, not loud, moving slowly, like a man tired but thorough. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the line of blue under the apartment door and waited for shadows. The whistling stopped at my door, then started up again farther down, then stopped at the stairwell like it had remembered a step and needed to go back. I didn't open the door. I stared at it until the first pale smear of morning came in around the blinds. At 9, I took the key back to the cemetery. It was in the drawer where I left it. I tried to be casual, but my hands were stiff on the steering wheel. The day had warmed, and whatever fog had lingered over the plowed fields had burned off. The office looked smaller in daylight. The cedars weren't black secrets, just trees that needed trimming. I walked out with the key in my pocket and set it against Eldon Price's stone where the wired ones were. It clinked. I stepped back and said sorry to the air because the air felt occupied. Then I did my dumbest smart thing. I breathed out and realized my breath was visible even though the sun was hot on my neck. That day I told Mara. She laughed like she didn't want to be mean about it and said she wanted to come back at night to get better shots. Eli said I should test the key in the gate to see if the city locks even matched the old style. He said the brain's a projector, and said it in a way that made me know he was mostly telling himself. Mr. Rojas just checked the log, read my note without comment, and put it back on the nail. A week later, Pastor Caldwell stopped by the office with a box of programs from a funeral and stood in the doorway like he didn't want to bring the weather in. Caldwell is the kind of man people tell things to even if they didn't plan on it. Gentle face, voice that makes even bad news feel solvable. He'd been at Prairie forever. He looked at the wall where the index card hung and then at the window and not at me. I saw you out by Eldon's, he said. The other day. You know we buried him with the keys. So I hear, I said. You were here then? I was a kid, he said, and smiled a little. My father's church. There was a heavy fog that morning. That cold kind that gets into the grass and stays low. People said it was a sign he should have had the day off. He didn't take days off. He'd whistle that little tune every time he locked the gate. Folks knew to get moving. Does he want them back? I asked, not sure which answer I preferred. Eldon wanted things in their place, Caldwell said. That's all I ever knew of him. That's not a bad way to be. It gets hard if your place turns out to be everywhere. He looked like he might say more, but then didn't. He tapped the door frame twice, habit, not superstition, and left. Things went sideways in December. Fog again, thick and damp enough to make your eyelashes feel heavy. I was alone on shift. Eli was down with the flu. Mara had a gallery night on campus. The orange glow of town balled up into a dome, and the cemetery sat beside it. A dark island in an orange sea. The new section lights came on with a buzz that sounded like mosquitoes trapped in a jar. I did the fence, slow and deliberate, counting the posts out loud because it kept my brain from counting other things. When I reached the maintenance gate, the whistle started. Not far, not near, 3 up, 1 down. Pause. Okay, I said to nobody, voice small under the world. Okay, I kept walking. The tune drifted parallel to me for a while, as if whoever was whistling was walking the interior path. At the far corner, it cut across the rows and bobbed up ahead the way a flashlight does when a kid runs with it. By then, the fog was pinning itself in strips along the ground, and I had to step over bands of white that came up to my knees. When I got close to Eldon's plot, it fell silent. I stopped. My heartbeat was big and stupid. I tried to swallow quietly and failed. A clink came from my left, then another, the exact sound of a ring of keys bumping against a buckle. A shadow thickened in the fog. The height of a tall man, shoulders forward like someone carrying a weight they won't name. I could not make my feet do what I asked them to do. The shape stood just outside the chain. I smelled wet iron and old oil, the scent I associate with my grandfather's garage. "Sir," I said, because the shape made me formal. The word came out of me even though I'm not a sir kind of person. I have to lock up. The shape lifted an arm. Something fell through the fog in a short arc and hit my boot, heavy enough to make a real contact. I looked down without meaning to and saw an iron key, not the same as the one from the drawer. This one had teeth cut in a notched pattern like a gate lock from an old movie, bigger than modern, the ring thick. When I looked up, the shape stepped back again, then lost its edges and became 2 lighter patches in the dark. I reached down and picked up the key. My hand stung like I'd touched snow. The whistle started not 3 feet away. Not a jump scare blast, just quiet and persistent, your uncle telling you to finish your chores. It walked away into the rows. I followed because I couldn't think of anything else that made sense. It led me to the main gates. They were shut. The lock hung open like a mouth. I put the key to it because my body wanted to get this done with, and because the part of your brain that stays useful under pressure is the same one that likes to complete a checklist. The key turned. The lock clicked. The whistle stopped. The world held still in a way that made me feel like I'd just done something final. I stood there a long time. The key was cold enough to ache in my hand. I put it in my pocket because I had no other place for it to be. When I turned around, the fog behind me was patterned. Darker in the pathways, lighter over the plots like someone had dragged a blanket and smoothed it with their palms. I expected the whistle to pick back up, walking away satisfied. It didn't. The quiet came down like felt. I wrote all that in the log. I didn't write the next part. On my way back to the office, I cut behind the newer monuments out of habit. My light grazed a name here and there, last letters turning to sparks in the beam. When I reached the place where the old section begins, I heard a noise I couldn't get wrong. The soft chuff of a person trying not to cry. Not the wail you hear at graveside. Not anything like that. Someone in a serious kind of trouble with their own breathing. It was a woman. I wanted to call out and didn't. The sound came from the same spot where the fog always got weird. Near Eldon's plot, 2 rows over. I walked toward it and it moved away. Not mean exactly, just steady. It kept pace with me like we were walking together and she needed to keep me in sight. I said, "Ma'am," and my voice vanished. After a minute, the crying thinned and became breaths. I turned my light off and on to let whoever it was know I wasn't trying to shine in their face. The breaths settled into a rhythm. Then the whistle rose in the middle of them and the breath slipped under it perfectly. The way a melody sits inside the strum of a guitar. I don't know how else to say it. Somebody has been practicing that duet a long time. I didn't follow that either. I went to the office. I took the key from my pocket and set it on the desk. Not in the drawer, not anywhere near a place that held my name. I sat until the clock said my shift was over without me seeing the time pass. I locked the office. I left. I did not look back down the rows because every part of me believed I would see a man standing with his hands in front of him, keys balanced across his palms like a waiter with a tray. In the morning, Mr. Rojas met me at the gate with coffee and pretended to scold me for not calling him when the fog came down. He looked older in daylight. He didn't ask for the key. I handed it to him anyway because I couldn't bring myself to put it back in the drawer. He turned it over in his hands and nodded like he recognized a face in a photo. "This is his outside key," he said. "Doesn't fit anything we use now." "How do you know that?" I asked. "Because I've seen it before," he said. He put it in his breast pocket and walked to Eldon's grave at a slow, regular pace. I followed at a distance without meaning to. When he reached the plot, he bent down the way people do when they're talking to a child. He wasn't praying. He was explaining. Then he set the key on the stone beside the wired pair. He tapped it once with his finger and stood. That should be the end. It isn't. The simple version would be, strange thing happened, we returned the object, the weather changed. Life doesn't like to be simple. Mara developed her fog shots and brought prints to show me. In one of them, taken as we first approached Eldon's plot, there's a faint vertical smear in the fog behind the chain. Not a person. Not anything you can point to in a room of reasonable people and convince them. Just a suggestion that the air there was in the shape of a tall thing that blocked light. In another photo taken a few seconds later, the smear is slightly closer to the camera, though nobody remembers her moving. I told her it's a trick of exposure and she nodded like she agreed and didn't. Eli came out with me a couple more times and insisted on staying by the gate while I walked. He kept his humor, but had hitchhiked on other thoughts. Twice he told me he woke to a whistle in his backyard by the mesquite fence. His dog stared at the sliding door with her ears up and then put her head under the couch. Eli put up a motion light. It didn't catch anything but cold air. Pastor Caldwell stopped again in January. He stood the same way in the doorway and looked anywhere but at me. He said he'd been thinking about that day in 1971 when they put Eldon down in the fog. He said his father had argued with the city men who wanted the keys on the stone. His father said it was foolish to tie a man to his job after he left it. The city said it was respect. Caldwell's father said respect is letting a man rest. I said yes to the city, Caldwell told me, in a voice he might use to tell me the weather would be bad for a picnic. I've wondered since. I said it wasn't his fault. He nodded anyway. Then he said something that bothers me more than the whistle does. Once in a fog, I heard a woman talking to him. He said, eyes on the corner of the room like reading a text only he could see. Her voice was low. She wasn't crying. She was asking if he'd seen a boy go by. He left. The door closed. I don't work nights now. I told the city I'd take the daytime mowing and the little flags for veterans on holidays. Mr. Rojas rotates with somebody else. I hear they hired a young guy who likes to talk about football and doesn't believe in anything, except how tired he is. Good for him. I still bring coffee by sometimes, and if fog's in the forecast, I have an excuse to be anywhere else. It doesn't help. On evenings when the warmth slides off the day and the grass goes white around the ankles of the stones, the tune finds me anyway, small and unshowy, the way a habit is. 3 up, 1 down. Pause. It doesn't want me to hum back. It doesn't ask me to be scared. It wants me to keep the gates in order. There's an iron key on my kitchen table as I write this. Not one from the wired pair. Not the one from the night by the gate. I wouldn't have kept it if I'd been given a choice. I found it in the pocket of a winter coat I hadn't worn in years, the morning after the last fog of spring. The teeth are clean and new, the ring worn. I set it on the wood and went to brush my teeth, and when I came back, it had shifted half an inch toward the apartment door. I tried not to notice that kind of thing until it became a pattern. And now it's a pattern. On fog nights when the light outside goes soft and the hallway swallows sound, the key is closer to the threshold of the table than it was at dinner. If I put it in a drawer, I wake to find it on top of the dresser, where the morning gets in first. Last week, I drove past the cemetery after dark because it's hard not to look at the place where something put its hand on your shoulder. The fog had pooled low, hiding the ground and leaving the stones floating. The gate was shut, the lock latched. There was a woman by the chain, young or small or both, with her hands together like she was about to knock on a door. She looked up when my headlights passed and I saw her lips move. I couldn't hear her. I kept driving because there's a number of things you can do at night that feel like being helpful and turn out not to be. When I checked the rear view once more, The gate was empty and the fog was doing that thing it does where it pretends to be still while it moves. I don't have some lesson for you, or a solution. I can tell you the melody never changes. If you hear it in the fog, it will walk you around and bring you back to where it started because that's how Eldon did the rounds. Clockwise, neat, no cut corners. If you find an iron key where it shouldn't be, don't take it home. If you've already taken it home, set it somewhere clean and say out loud that you're sorry and that you'll put it back when the weather lets you. He was not mean. He was exact, and there's a kind of exactness that keeps you safe if you match it and loses you if you don't. Tonight the forecast says clear, which in Lubbock means stars like tacks and the wind putting its shoulder against your car. Still, I took the key from my table and placed it by the door because I'm a person who respects a pattern when it repeats enough times to make a groove. I turned off the kitchen light and listened. A neighbor's TV murmured. Somewhere a train blew its horn in a long fading line. When I breathed on the apartment window, the fog I made hung on the glass longer than it should have. I wiped it away with my sleeve. The hallway was quiet. I could almost believe all of this belongs to weather and nerves. I could, and then very softly from the end of the hall came 3 notes stepping up, one sliding down, and a pause like a breath before turning a key.